Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto noticed Kabuto being a traitor and actually pointed out part 1 before I start. Please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. There was a lone red and white Uchiwa fan on the building ahead. Not right. Something in my brain caught on it and I found myself slowing down before I stopped entirely to stare. The light from the full moon above painted everything in sharp looming contrasts. Not right. Even the door on the building I had stalled in front of was bigger than it should have been. Not right. I held my hands out and looked at them. Not right. Not right. They were tiny and especially pale in the moonlight. They weren't just childlike, these were the hands of an actual child, these were definitely not my own. Long black sleeved shirt with a wide collar that I could feel fanning out around my neck. Looking down, I could see that I was wearing plain white shorts that ended above skinny knees, with wrappings on each leg that disappeared out of sight under the top cuff of sturdy-looking ankle-high boots with open toes. Being suddenly child size aside, this was nothing I would ever wear. I was dreaming, I decided. Just like that, everything else fell into place. The unease and sense of wrongness that had been building up released, and I could feel myself, well, not feel any less off, but at least more sorted. I knew what was happening now. I was asleep, dreaming that I was walking right into the Uchiha massacre's aftermath. And that I was Sasuke. As far as mixing potentially shitty, embarrassing dreams and nightmares went, this was absolutely a masterstroke in my subconscious's continued war against every single thing I've ever done or had interest in, though to be fair in this case, I practically asked for it this time. I was never mixing melancholy binge drinking of cheap, extremely questionable alcohol with nostalgic anime marathons again. I bet this is why that bottle had been priced down for clearance. I should have known better than to trust something on sale by that much. Not that being aware of my follies helped me much here. Or that I was dreaming, for that matter. For all that the idea of lucid dreaming appealed to me and was something my therapist even encouraged after I had brought it up once in counseling, the fancy cool parts of lucid dreaming, where you could control what happened. That part was beyond me. I couldn't even persuade my own dreams or the figures in them to do what I wanted. So, I was left with two options. I could either get out of Dodge, metaphorically speaking, and probably spend the rest of this dream effectively going in circles and just wait it out, or ram myself straight into and through the inevitable nightmare part and get it over with. I kept walking forward, letting the little part of my mind that was still keyed into the dream lead me to where Sasuke was supposed to go. This was honestly not the smart choice, but, well. That was also something I was supposed to be working out in counseling. But as far as nightmares went, though, knowing this was just a dream deafened it pretty thoroughly. The dark, empty streets and occasional sign of violence were just stage dressing, and nothing said I had to play the role I was in. The Sasuke in the anime and manga might have been a scared little boy, but this was a dream, and I wasn't Sasuke. I refused to be afraid of a nightmare framing itself like this. Maybe if I kept telling myself that it would work. After a while, and coming across more bodies than there definitely had been in the anime brain I entered the road in front of Sasuke's family home. The cracked Uchiwa on the wall across from the front door was an ominous reminder of what set this off in the series. I already knew where the confrontation would be, and the tension was nearly palpable just from the lack of light, high shadows, and being so much smaller than the dream world, but it didn't stop the sense of curiosity swelling at the opportunity to take a look around anyways as I opened the front door and entered. The Jenkin was neat and tidy looking in the darkness, and nothing at all like a warning sign that murder most foul had happened within the house's walls. I opened the jet tobacco against the wall out of curiosity. Sasuke's parents' own footwear for wearing outside of the house were inside the cabinet, just waiting as if they'd get used again. Even though a little bit of myself protested against it, manners aren't going to really matter here. I didn't bother to go barefoot and instead pushed onward into the rest of the house, which was just as eerily silent as everything else had been since the dream started. The absolute stillness of everything was highlighted by what moonlight entered through the windows, and even though the horrific moments in the streets outside hadn't gotten to me, the splashes of blood, the occasional silhouettes of slumped bodies inside their homes, and the spray of kunai and shuriken in walls and on the ground hadn't done anything but make me remind myself that it was a nightmare. Of course it was supposed to be terrible, and it would be better if I stopped letting myself look at every pool of blood I saw. That sensation of everything being permanently stopped was what made me feel truly uneasy. Finally, I forced myself to go onto the Ingawa. It was a short walk from here to the solid-looking double doors at the other end of the veranda. I paused right outside of them before shaking my head. I already knew what was going to be on the other side, why was I hesitating? Before I let myself come up with any kind of stupid side thoughts to answer that, I pushed both doors inward and stepped in. Two bodies were sprawled over on the room's tatami, the pools of still blood beneath them meeting to join into one. A figure in armor stood on the other side of the room, just barely in the shadows, the hilt of his sword jutting above one shoulder. Itachi. A mix of sympathy and annoyance welled up in me. Everything about the two Uchiha brothers in the show had been tragedies based in wrong or manipulated decisions. Do you feel stupid and regret it yet? I couldn't stop myself from asking. In Sasuke's young clear voice the question sounded absurd. Judging from the fact Itachi was only staring and hadn't started his torment of his younger brother yet, the whole dream wasn't exactly expecting that either. You weren't dumb. You could have bought more time somehow, even without Shisui, if you ignored Obito and Danzo, I rambled on. But that's not really fair to you at all, I guess, huh? I mean, even for being a hyped-up genius according to Kishi, being manipulated by a guy who's been gaslit to the point he's willing to destroy the world over a crush, and dealing with someone like Danzo, who's had decades of experience in pressing on people's weak points, is a lot for a 13-year-old on top of the clan coup and your dad's expectations, isn't it? How do you know that name? I was no longer standing on the ground, but suddenly held up against the door, pinned high enough by his forearm that Itachi was looking me directly in the eye without looking down. It happened so suddenly I didn't even see him move, much less grab me. The force was enough that I actually felt winded, realistically so. Because this isn't really happening, I told him. Itachi's eyes shifted from their dark color to red, visible in the low light. The Sharingan. And then, again so quickly I couldn't even see, I felt the sensation of blood welling from one hand. Itachi's loose hand was now gripping a kunai. I wasn't the only one bleeding. Did he think this was a genjutsu? I didn't get the opportunity to ask or wonder further. Manjukum Sharingan. Its distinct tri-pronged shape blossomed in Itachi's eyes and he, and the surrounding room, disappeared. The light from the red full moon above painted everything in sharp looming contrasts, dark and light inverted, all the colors sapped except for the red. The Uchiha district was no longer empty, but it was clear it was not going to stay populated by the living for long. Itachi was mowing them down with a heartless intensity, unstoppable. Even the fully grown ninja who could get to their weapons were nothing against him. Over and over, it kept going on. But despite all of the disturbing aspects of it, the fact that this barely teenage boy was showcasing these murders, with some of them pushed to the fore, over and over, I didn't feel the same connection to these people that he was expecting. This was an unsettling nightmare, but it wasn't a fine-tuned nightmare for me. The high contrast of imagery and brutal violence only reminded me of every dramatic action flick and slasher film I had ever been dragged along unwillingly to see, a spectacle for the audience. At least, I kept telling myself that. It made me feel off balance, uneasy. Something in my head kept chiming in that this was what a real murder looked like when it wasn't an actor having to play pretend, that this wasn't the eased away and sanitary death of my grandfather in the hospital. My stomach roiled. Just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. My stomach didn't appreciate this as the scenery and perspective changed once more from standing and being forced to watch multiple gruesome murders in contrasting shades to being pinned. I threw up, vomit splashing onto Itachi's armor, pants, and his feet. Itachi grimaced, backing away, letting me fall to the floor. Ataudo in his shock at being vomited on, it looked like he had forgotten the facade he had been so determined to put up before this. This wasn't the sort of derailment I had expected. Neither did this dream version of Itachi, apparently. Sorry, I muttered, automatically. I couldn't remember if I had ever tasted the aftermath of puking in a dream before. Was taste even a thing in my dreams before? I wiped my mouth out as best as I could on a sleeve before I stood up, stomach still queasy. Are you still going to try and pretend you did this just to become stronger? He stared at me. You shouldn't know any of this. I already said, this isn't really happening. This is just a story. You convince your little brother you hate him and that he has to kill you to prove his strength because of what? Your own guilt and making sure he doesn't turn against the village. Between that and getting set to stake Akatsuki out you've set yourself up for more than you can handle. Passive suicide is still suicide, even with mind games included. What would you do, then? The staring had eased into something more steady, less caught unawares. Like he was discussing something completely mundane, taking advice into consideration. Not get into it with Orochimaru. Maybe figure out how to prevent him from killing the third. Actually get regular medical care to potentially prevent getting terminally ill. That was simultaneously the stupidest and yet most sympathetic thing about Itachi right there, to me. Not dying before everything goes to hell is probably a real good idea, too, since Kabuto goes nuts with the reincarnation technique, I couldn't help but add, after a moment. I couldn't think of anything else that Itachi had really been involved in directly. Mostly he had just been an ominous target for Sasuke, another example of Konoha doing its young geniuses wrong. A tragedy. I'll consider it. Itachi approached me. And then, unexpectedly I should have known he poked my forehead. Get stronger anyways, Sasuke. The Sharingan appeared in his eyes again, and then there was nothing. Good morning, Sasuke, a cheerful girl's voice said. What, it can't be morning. and then the rest of me caught up. I blinked and looked down at my hands, clasped. They weren't as small as the last time, but still pale, wrists covered by the blue ties buckled down to keep the white arm warmers from slipping. Another Naruto dream? Really? And this time, it was the academy. I remembered this episode even, both from watching it the very first time it aired and many times more during rewatches, most recently just last weekend. Was it something I ate? Did I need to adjust my diet? Go to counseling more? My contemplations didn't help me any because the chattering of increasingly angry preteen girls was only becoming louder. Sakura and Ino were at the front of a crowd that was starting to become all the girls in the room. And then, a light thud on the desk in front of me. I looked up. Naruto was squinting at me, way too close for comfort. Wait, no. I was not into having a repeat of that dumb kiss as Sasuke. I moved to get out of the way, but it was too late, the kid in the row in front had already shouted, jostling Naruto and our foreheads crashed together at the head plates. Hard. For being a dream, that hurt. Hey. What's the big deal? Naruto shouted. The blonde had fallen over and was rubbing one hand to his forehead where he had shoved the hit I ate up. Oh, Sasuke. Are you okay? Ino. She managed to shove her way past all the other girls, slide in past the desk and pull me back into a sitting position. Naruto, you can't just be on desks like that. Yeah, Naruto. Sakura had gone around to the other side. I was now stuck in place between both of the fangirls and Naruto was sulking on top of the desk. The last time I had ended up in a situation like this was undergrad. I didn't even do anything. A disgruntled noise rose from somewhere behind us. This is the last time we're going to be in here, do you really have to make it more of a drag than it already is? Ino twisted around to glare daggers at the speaker. It's not my fault you're so lazy and don't have a romantic bone in your body, Shikamaru. On the plus side, my penchant for observing and overthinking to myself quietly wasn't being commented on. Everyone else was also too wound up in themselves. And you think Sasuke does? He hasn't replied to any of you. Shikamaru scoffed. Okay, maybe one person noticed. I looked back to stare at him. He had the audacity to look pleased with himself. He was probably knocked senseless by Naruto's big head. Sakura, my head isn't that big. Is it? I felt fingers grip onto my head from behind. I twisted away from looking back at Shikamaru, raising an arm to bat away the offender. It only made it worse when I got poked in the eye by a slipping finger. Gah. Naruto. It had to be. What do you think you're doing? I'm comparing the size of our heads. Did he really have to shout so close to my ears? You just got me in the eye. I kept trying to twist around and move to bat him off, but he was frustratingly clingy. Was this how he managed to graffiti the carved Hokage faces? Climbing skills like this? I can't measure right if you don't hold still. Knees dug into my sides. Bet. Off. The words were punctuated by my attempts to elbow him and when that didn't work, smash him into the desk. Still no luck. Was he a limpet or something? Did he have a mountain goat in his ancestry? Was that the secret behind the fourth? Nuo. That's his best feature. They're so deep and thoughtful looking. Ino was fine with beating Naruto up with the other girls, but that was the best she could come up with when he had an active death grip on my head. Really? How did this dream end up devolving worse than the actual show? Shanro. She wouldn't. I suddenly had a bad feeling about this. Naruto's head smashed into the back of mine. I went over the edge of the bench, falling onto the floor. I couldn't believe she did it. The only upside was that Naruto had finally let go after Sakura's attack. It was time for a tactical retreat away from this nonsense. When I got up and brushed myself off, I ignored both of the girls' protests and Naruto, pushed my way out and walked away to sit somewhere else away from persistent fangirls. I ended up sitting next to Shino. Of all the possible options in the room, he was the only one the preteen fangirls were staying clear of. Thankfully, none of them closed in. A few even whined. Great Kunoichi they'll make if they're creeped out by a classmate, I said, under my breath. Shino turned to stare at me. You think they find me that off-putting? I forgot he wasn't only close enough to overhear that, but how much hearing something like that would have sucked at this age. I also felt a vague sense of unease at the idea of trying to lie. Probably, but they're all vain and self-centered. Good, Shino said, satisfied. And then he turned to look at the front of the classroom again. What just happened? The door opened and Iruka walked in, a clipboard in his hand. Team assignments. Even as I found myself wondering what the other names were that were skipped over for the sake of speeding the story along, looking at Iruka through me. As a character, he was set up as a responsible adult, an experienced teacher and even a father figure of sorts to Naruto. But he really was still baby-faced, even with the scar bisecting his nose. If he showed up as a student to the class I was a teaching assistant for myself, I wouldn't have blinked twice. But here, he was actually in charge of this rowdy bunch of kids. To them, he would count as old, which made me feel old. I had seniority on him and maybe even Kakashi. It was a strange contrast compared to right now. Just the weirdness of a dream. Alright, quiet, he finally called out, and there was a short scramble as people moved to be behind desks. Even from sitting near Shino, I could see Ino and Sakura's sour expressions as they realized they had ended up as deskmates with Naruto between them instead. The blonde was too busy mooning over the fact he was sitting next to Sakura to realize neither girl was happy with the circumstances. As of today, you are all ninjas. To get here, you face difficult trials and hardships. But that's nothing, Haruka said proudly, looking at all of us. I didn't even belong here and I felt pleased at his earnest praise. I could see the impact he had on the students here. All of the ones in view, even Naruto, were sitting a bit straighter, not wanting their sensei to be disappointed in them. For all I knew, though, Shikamaru was probably still slouching. What comes next will be far more difficult. Now you're only genin, first level ninjas. All the genin will be grouped into 3-man squads. Each squad will be led by a genin, an elite ninja. I could hear small gasps from throughout the classroom, particularly from the fangirls. Ino and Sakura were already glaring daggers at each other. We want each squad to have a balance of strengths and weaknesses, so that's how we set them up. I will now announce the squads. As Haruka began to list Team 1, I gazed around to see what the various reactions were. None of these kids really showed up again after this in the show, but going off the threats Kakashi had made about getting recycled back into the academy, that probably made sense, though I really didn't get the point behind throwing them back when they graduated. What would a genin even do if they were kept back? Naruto's own surprise had to have meant they weren't kept with the general student pool. Actually, just how big was the academy supposed to be? And now, Team 7. Did I really just space out through the first 7 teams, or was it something my head didn't even bother to fill in? Haruno Sakura Uzumaki Naruto a loud cry and a yes. Interrupted him briefly before he continued on, and it's yes Sasuke. Sakura cheered as nearly every other girl in here wailed at their misfortune. What? Haruka-sensei, how could I end up with that loser? There we go. That was supposed to be after all of the squad announcements, but I guess not getting beaten into a pulp meant he was more willing to complain sooner. Naruto was about to get embarrassed in front of the whole class. Watching it on the screen was one thing, but I didn't want to even dream about being in the same room as that much second-hand embarrassment. Does it really matter? I said out loud, before Haruka could explain the ranking for teams. Especially when while it might have been the reason Haruka was given, it probably wasn't the actual one. We're still going to be on the same team as genin, whatever we do, so we're going to have to work together. Yeah, right. Like I want to work with you. He's right, Haruka said. He nodded in approval towards me. Whether you like it or not, you're going to be teammates. As ninja of Konoha, we all have to work together, and that means learning in your genin teams is crucial to your future. Naruto exhaled. Fine, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. I let out a breath in relief. Well, it was probably impossible to prevent Naruto from making a complete ass of himself all the time, dream or no, it didn't mean I wanted to watch him get completely humiliated. Haruka continued to read out the rest of the team assignments. Once he was finally finished, he looked relieved. Did he expect the other assignments to get the same amount of protest or something? After lunch, you'll meet your new instructors, he finally told us. You're dismissed until then. Before anyone could even ask him any questions, he left the classroom. Not so fast that he could be accused of bailing on us, but it was definitely fast enough that if anyone had anything to say to him, we would have had to chase him down. What surprised me was that before Haruka got out the door, Naruto was already swinging himself over the side of the desk to go after him. Hey. Haruka-sensei. Wait up. He didn't wait. It was probably just as well that Naruto bolted after him, door clattering behind him. And then a shout that was undeniably Naruto, but muffled enough that we couldn't make it out from in here. It had to be about the scores. I didn't bother to wait. I found myself not wanting to stick around for whatever else Ino and Sakura would have in store and quickly left the classroom. Not quite as fast as Naruto did in his desire to harass Haruka, but fast enough that I didn't see any of the others in the corridor before I went up the stairs. It wasn't until I stopped that I found myself concerned. I was holding a small wrapped bundle, which when I opened it revealed a cylindrical bento. And I was in the same spot Sasuke was in this part of the story. I hadn't meant to go anywhere in particular, this just happened. Was that going to be the norm with this kind of weird lucid dream that I was beginning to become worried was going to become a pattern? I huffed and decided that I didn't want to think about it too much for now. Even if I didn't want to assume that the rest of this dream was going to go like it did in the story, this was still a pretty nice place to look out from. It was a high enough vantage point that I could see the grounds out around the academy and into the village some. Looking out, I could see the newly minted Team Asuma, not that they knew it was going to be him, wandering out to sit outside on one of the stairwell platforms. Further below and beyond them on the grounds, Sakura. She was probably looking for Sasuke. For me. I spied Naruto leaving the building and immediately approached her. I grimaced. I didn't expect it to turn out anyway but how it did in the show, but I still watched anyway. Soon enough, he slunk off, completely rejected. Which meant that any time now he was going to come and invade my space up here. Naruto on his own was too loud for my tastes. I didn't really mind kids, but earlier in the classroom had just reminded me exactly how loud middle schoolers were and that they didn't fear showing it. And this bunch were able to carry weapons, which carried its own obnoxious factor. The only one of them that probably wouldn't drive me completely crazy was Hinata. Wait. No, that was a lie. She was sweet, but her fangirling was just directed towards Naruto instead. I didn't want to deal with that either. I leaned over the windowsill. By now Naruto had disappeared from sight, which meant he was probably inside somewhere plotting. I didn't want to deal with him, but it looked like it was going to be inevitable. At least it was a nice day. Finally, it happened. I hadn't heard him enter, but it was hard to ignore the sudden shout. When I turned away from the window, Naruto was lunging directly at me. I was entirely blank on what Sasuke had done when this happened. I dodged, twisting before he reached me and getting out of the way, only to watch Naruto go flying out the window. He shouted in surprise when he realized what was happening. I managed to grab one of his feet, doing my best to brace against the wall to not go out through the window too, and was rewarded with a loud thumping crash from making sure I didn't find out how well he'd take a crash landing from this far up as he smashed against the outside wall. Holding onto him was a lot easier than I thought it'd be. Were you trying to figure out if you could fly? I couldn't help make the comment. That wouldn't have happened if you didn't move. Naruto complained. His face bore the marks of the outside wall as he pushed against it to look up. What, was I supposed to let you knock me through the window instead? I snarked. I immediately felt guilty. I was an adult. Not actually 12. I was more mature than to get into a verbal fight with a 12-year-old. Especially one like Naruto. Even in a dream. I could do a lot better than this. Just help me back up. He swung his arms. What happened to not wanting to be on a team with me? I couldn't help but ask. Even as I said that, it felt off. It was probably because even though I wasn't Sasuke, I couldn't imagine myself being too excited at being in the same team as Naruto either. I had never liked getting put on team projects with the loud ones, and he was a prime example of those kinds of kids at the worst possible age. Hey. You can't just leave me hanging here. I could drop you, I threatened. You wouldn't. You sure? I did my best to adjust the grip I had on one of his legs. And then I let go of the other one. Even with that, it slipped a bit and I was left holding onto the end of his ankle instead. Ah. Okay. Let me up. Naruto panicked, flailing. I give. You're such a jerk. Yeah, well, payback, I said, muttering. I grabbed both legs again and started the surprisingly difficult task of pulling Naruto back up. It was harder than I thought it would be. Admittedly, it was for one big reason. Stop wriggling around. What are you, a worm or something? I can't help it, how am I supposed to not deal with getting my face scraped? He shouted back up. I'm not trying to attack people right in front of windows. Yeah, right. Didn't Iruka-sensei point out it was a good tactic? He countered. I had no idea. Even so, it wasn't like I wanted to admit it. Probably not when you aren't expecting to go out of it. I stopped, finally, once his legs were fully inside and shoved so he'd be planted on the floor. Naruto seemed to have different ideas on when was enough because just as I did, he grappled the window edge and shoved inward. It was too much force at once, combined. We crashed to the floor in a tangle. His already wild-looking hair looked even crazier from his short time upside down and then this brief tumble. His cheeks bore some scrapes from smacking against the rough outside wall, mixing with the whisker marks. He looked ridiculous and I ended up snorting in my attempt to stifle a laugh. What are you laughing at? He said, pouting. Crossing his arms only made it harder for me to avoid laughing. You look all messed up and this is what you're going to go back to the classroom looking like. I didn't need to bring up the reason why he'd probably not wanted Sakura would no doubt give him an even more frigid reaction if he inevitably tried to awkwardly flirt with her again. He puffed his cheeks out in indignation, frantically combing his fingers through his hair, resulting in random flattened licks. My expression probably didn't help matters because he gave up with a final tousle that just barely looked better than it had before. Ah. You ruin everything. I was the one minding my own business when you came in here, I pointed out. Naruto didn't look impressed at all by my logic. Which, honestly, could have been dream logic at work or just Naruto being Naruto. Either way, he was distracted enough that I didn't think I had to worry about his plotting, at least for now. I didn't really want to deal with thinking about the issues with getting tied up. Yeah, well, so. A compelling argument, really. Anything else he was going to say was interrupted by an ominous gurgle and his eyes widening. GHHK. Oh, I knew what that was about. Dangling upside down out the window and all the moving around probably had sped it up. I had absolutely no interest in getting in the way of that mess. He clutched his stomach, bolting to his feet. Before I could say anything, he ran for the stairs. I guess that was one way to get rid of Naruto. At least for now. That left the question of what to do next. I didn't feel like I was going to wake up anytime soon. From where I was I could see Sakura sitting on a bench. No. I refused. I picked up Sasuke's lunch and went to the classroom instead. Sakura was just too much to deal with after the close Naruto encounter. I didn't want to deal with more preteen drama. Not with this love triangle anyways. Which seemed to invite only more issues. Not all of the students had left the classroom to eat their lunch or go elsewhere. Hinata was still in there, sitting near the front of the room, near her new teammates. Kiba was lying on top of one of the desks, knees pushed up and together, with Akamaru resting on top of his chest. Shino was barely finishing his lunch. And when Hinata saw me, she blushed. That wasn't a good sign. Oh, Sasuke-kun, she began. Do you know where Naruto-kun is? Well, that was a power move for a shy girl like Hinata. I felt bad at even considering not telling her. The sense of guilt was just too strong. I caved. He didn't look like he was feeling too well, I said, hedging my bets with something vague that would still get the idea across. He's probably going to be back in here later. Oh, she said, softly. She was clearly disappointed. I hope he's alright. I wouldn't want him to miss his new teacher. Hinata's utter sincerity was powerful. And way too much. It's Naruto, I answered. I'm sure he's fine. At least, in this case when it was just him drinking spoiled milk. I didn't think anything short of serious injury would really put him down at this point in time, and it's not like I was dreaming anything crazy. Before she could say anything more, I skirted around her to move on. Thank you, Sasuke-kun. However much I wanted to pretend to ignore that, I couldn't and gave an awkward nod at her. That seemed to pass Hinata's standards, and she went back to Kiba and Shino, who had watched the whole conversation. Shino didn't seem to care, but Kiba was smirking, and I could tell he was already planning on teasing her. Why couldn't I get away from the preteen drama? What do you want with Naruto, Hinata? Kiba started, a fierce grin on his face. I really didn't want to watch this happen. Well, Kiba wasn't a complete and utter jerk in the show, he was absolutely insensitive enough that this was just going to be embarrassing to watch. There was no way for teasing someone sensitive to go well. This was the only plus ending up as Sasuke. Not dreaming about being Hinata. Don't you think that's her own business? I muttered. I didn't mean to say that out loud. Kiba still caught it, however, and turned to face me, Akamaru jumping off his knees with a tiny bark as the boy moved to sit up. Oh, so it's your business to get involved. She just asked me where he was and I answered, I pointed out. You're the one who butted in. Are you going to really make this a bad footing for your team, too, when we haven't met any of the Junin instructors yet? God knew that Team 7 under Kakashi was the kind of disaster that could only be put together on purpose. Team Kurenai wasn't nearly as bad, but Kiba would definitely make it like that if he kept it up. Like you're one to talk, Kiba snorted. You bailed so fast. Sakura started looking all mopey. Maybe, but I'm not teasing her. You're the one who should be rethinking their behavior here, not me. The glance in her direction showed that Hinata was blushing and only getting redder in the face. She wouldn't actually die of embarrassment if this kept up, right? Or blow up or something. Actually, I didn't want to risk that. Hinata, do you want to go and look for Naruto with me? I was going to regret this. She managed to flush even brighter red than she had already become. And then, so quietly I barely could hear her, yes. I'd like that. Kiba's jaw dropped. Wah hey. Shino managed to give the most meaningful look at Kiba I had ever seen from someone whose eyes you couldn't even see. I couldn't believe I was going to do this. I walked back over to the door, sliding it open, and tilted my head, waiting for Hinata to come over. Shino. Yes. Think you can get it through Kiba's head what not to say to people you're supposed to work with? Kiba looked flabbergasted. What? You can't take his side. I rolled my eyes. It's not about taking sides, it's about not being insensitive to other people's feelings. I didn't wait to see if Shino was going to actually give a response. We left just as Kiba started sputtering. I closed the door behind us. Why, you really didn't have to say anything, Hinata said, still flushing brightly. He'll get over it, I told her as I started to walk. How are you so sure? Because his head's as thick as Naruto's. He'll be fine, I reassured her. Are you sure? She asked, again. Well, if you don't want him to be fine, I guess we could let his mom know. I'm sure she'd have some words for him. Hinata's eyes widened for a moment in shock before she caught on that it was a joke. He was just teasing, she said, finally. She still looked more at ease than she had earlier, though. He could have gone about it better, I said, shrugging. The restrooms had to be around here somewhere, but I had no idea where. Was it because I was overthinking it? Thank you for speaking up, Hinata said, again so softly I don't think I was supposed to actually hear her. I didn't really know what to say, so I shrugged. We turned a corner, heading outside, and I smacked head first into Naruto for what was the third time in a row. Why did that keep happening? I staggered, and he wound up on the floor. He still looked off color. What, you again? He clearly felt the same way I did over the repeated head knockings. Watch where you're going. I made a face. We were both going around the corner, no one's at fault here. Next to me, Hinata had gone totally silent, standing still. Right. Hinata was wondering where you were, I said, when it became clear she was doing her best statue impression. Or maybe not the best, because she made the tiniest deep when I said her name. Naruto was completely oblivious. This was hopeless. Oh. I was fine. Doing stuff. He said, as he scrambled to his feet. His posture was suspiciously good, probably from trying to ignore his stomach. I guess he didn't want to expose a perceived weakness like the runs, even if he was utterly clueless that the girl he was talking to had a huge crush on him to the point of it being debilitating. Ought to be prepared for my future ninja career, since I'm going to be Hokage. Hinata blushed. You'd make a good Hokage, Naruto-kun, she managed to say with limited stuttering. Believe it. This was becoming painful to watch. It's about coming on time to head back to the classroom, I said, lying. I didn't actually know when exactly it was supposed to be, but I knew I didn't actually feel like playing at dream matchmaking anymore. Not when it gave me the vaguely uneasy feeling that it just meant it was going to be sprung back on me in return. It seemed inevitable, between the fangirls and repeat headbashing after avoiding Naruto's lips. Oh, Sasuke. I could feel my insides begin to shrivel as Sakura made herself known. Was this my brain twistedly punishing me for pretending to be better than the boy band fangirls when I was in middle school? That I didn't know the difference between NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys? It had to be. I was looking for you earlier, but I didn't see you. I felt like having lunch alone, I said, avoiding gritting my teeth. Not that I actually ate any of it, but still. Oh. Sakura actually looked crestfallen. I was hoping we could eat lunch together, since we're going to be on the same genin team. We were going to walk back to the classroom together, Hinata spoke up, shyly. Why don't you join us? Sure. Almost immediately, Sakura bounced back to cheerfulness to stand next to me, close enough to make me feel uncomfortable. I had no counter against that. As much as I didn't want Sakura clinging to me, I had even less interest in shooting Hinata down on what was a reasonable suggestion, especially after not quite intentionally giving her a confidence boost. If anyone needed it, it was her. Sakura, you can't really want to be next to that guy, do you? Naruto really was oblivious, wasn't he? You're too loud and immature to understand why someone like Sasuke's so cool, Sakura sniped at the blonde as she clamped a hand on my arm. Did Konoha just not teach anyone about personal space? I don't think there's anything cool about just staring into space all the time, Naruto grumbled. And I'm plenty mature. As if. I didn't know where to start with breaking up the bickering. Was there even anywhere to start with that? I sighed. Let's just go back to class. I think the only one completely happy in the whole group while we walked back was Hinata. She was pleased with walking next to Naruto, who still looked slightly disgruntled at Sakura's attack on his own perceived maturity, even though he was at least able to walk next to her. Sakura's own pleasure at invading my personal space was muted by Naruto's presence. I was too busy being preoccupied by evaluating how much of a personal attack the whole dream was on my being to even contemplate happiness. For what had been a quick trip out of the classroom, by the time we got back, it had already started to fill up again with its new graduates. It looked like people had moved around to sit near their new teammates. Even next to the room's door it was obvious that the main topic of conversation through the room was what everyone thought their new Junin sensei would be like. Hinata peeled off to rejoin Shino and Kiba, who looked still put out from earlier, but not before she whispered a quiet thank you to me. It was so unexpected I barely caught it. I shrugged awkwardly in return before heading for the back row. There was still an open spot near the back corner, which would at least make it harder for more things to happen, and I refused to give my subconscious more openings than it had already found already. There was no way I was going to bring any of this up in counseling. Ever. Maybe I'd write it out and set the paper on fire like I used to as a kid. Then again, that would also be acknowledging I even dreamed this, so maybe not that, either. Of course, this came with the unfortunate fact that it wasn't going to be alone. Sakura was still clinging to my arm, and her expression was daring all the other girls to try and make something of it. And where Sakura went, so would Naruto. What was that about? Naruto asked, as loud as he ever was. For someone who was good at setting pranks and evading nearly anyone looking for him, you'd think he'd have a better concept of an inside voice. At least in a dream. Maybe you'll find out when you're older, I muttered. Eh? What's supposed to mean? It means you're such a boy, Naruto. Right, Sasuke. On the one hand, I was personally inclined to agree with her. On the other, I wasn't sure why she would expect Sasuke to agree with her. I decided to just not answer. It wasn't long until Iruka returned, with the first of the Junin sensei to show up. The conversations taking place throughout the room died off entirely, leaving only silence. To my disappointment, I had no idea who any of them were, besides Asuma and Kurenai. Apparently my brain couldn't eke out any of the other more prominent Junin in the series as stand-ins. Iruka was actually finessing the whole process by calling the students down by name instead of team and introducing them to their Junin sensei and even breaking the ice conversationally a bit before letting their new instructors take them away. Considering how much concern he showed over this class's graduates in the series, it made sense he wanted to be involved in the handover, though it did bring into question why he wouldn't have stuck around when Kakashi appeared to be a no-show. It made me wonder what the academy's normal procedures would have been if it was real. This sort of turnover like Iruka was doing, or just leaving the students to the mercies of their new Junin sensei. Probably the second. Eventually Team 7 were the only ones left in the room, along with Iruka. He was starting to look annoyed. Naruto couldn't contain his impatience for that long. He actually clambered up onto the desk again, in spite of how well that had gone over for him earlier. "Hey, Iruka-sensei, what's taking this guy so long?" he shouted. "I decided it'd be a good idea to move." "Naruto. How many times do I have to tell you to not stand on the desks?" I barely had enough time to process Iruka suddenly holding a chalkboard eraser before it nailed Naruto straight in the face. He fell backwards in a puff of chalk dust, coughing, landing in the spot I had just evacuated. Sakura stood up and glared at him, fanning the dust away from her as she tried to get out of its slowly expanding range. "I wanted to look nice for our new sensei, Naruto. And we don't even know if they will be a guy." One of the other Junin sensei was a kunoichi. She actually sounded enthused by the possibility. I guess guys impressing Sasuke weren't actually the only thing on her mind. She still did her best to pat herself down to get as much of the chalk dust out of her hair and clothes, though. I wasn't sure how I felt about the fact that this dream was going that far in filling out the sort of person an anime character could be, so I resolved it by walking away to sit at the front instead. Iruka sighed. His burst of temper at Naruto had vanished as abruptly as it had arrived. "You are right though," he admitted. He stood up from his desk. "It's been almost 2 hours since your new sensei was supposed to show up. I'm going to go find out what's taking so long. Just wait here." With that, he left the classroom, but not without stopping and turning around at the door. "And don't you even think about pulling anything, Naruto." Naruto groaned. I turned back to look. He hadn't moved from where he had landed yet. One foot was just barely sticking up in view. "Alright. Just find him so we can finally do cool ninja stuff." He finally righted himself. Sakura slid onto the bench next to me and invaded my personal space once more. "What do you think our new sensei is going to be like?" she asked, trying to flutter her eyes at me. She did it for too long, and her direct eye contact afterwards went from attempted gazing into just becoming an unsettling stare. "I think we're going to have to get used to them being late all the time," I said, twisting away so I could pretend she wasn't still trying to directly stare into my eyes. Sasuke's eyes. Beyond the fact that I wasn't comfortable with a middle school-age child trying to flirt with me, the fact that 12-year-olds didn't even know how to flirt well made this more unsettling than it had to be. Not that I wanted to meet a 12-year-old who could flirt well, but still. "Ugh, I hope not," Sakura said, sounding frustrated. "What sort of elite ninja is late all of the time?" "He's probably lame and stuff," Naruto said, flopping on top of the desk in front of us. Sakura's hope that Team 7 sensei would be a kunoichi didn't seem to matter, and the fact Naruto had already decided it must be a man. Not that he was wrong. I still wasn't going to tell him, though. I didn't want to deal with being bugged over knowing, which I could tell would already be inevitable if I did. So I ended up resting my head on clasped together hands and resigned myself to waiting until Kakashi did show up. It made me wonder exactly how long we were going to be waiting. I know in the manga and show it was for hours, and it actually felt like I had been waiting the nearly 2 hours Iruka had mentioned, but what did that actually mean it was going to be? 2, 3, 4. With how realistic this dream was being, it wasn't something I wanted to actually imagine waiting out for that long. Naruto pulled a crumpled and balled up piece of paper out of one of his pockets and started to throw it up above him, trying to catch it, increasingly letting it get closer. Every once in a while, he would fail to catch it at the last moment and get smacked in the face by the paper. Eventually, Sakura sighed heavily. "Do you really have to do that?" she asked, annoyed. "Do what?" Naruto asked, letting it fall on his face before he sat up. "That. Play with trash," she said, making a face. "Why are you even carrying that around, anyways?" "It isn't trash," Naruto answered, indignantly. "It just made me even more curious." "What is it, then?" "It's my rent notice," Naruto told me. Sakura looked surprised. "You live on your own already? I thought there was an orphanage." Naruto twisted away, looking self-conscious for a split moment before recovering and pumping his fist. "Yeah. I have my own place and I can keep my cupboard filled with instant ramen and it means I don't have to put up with anyone in my own space. I'm a free man. Sakura didn't catch it. If anything, she only looked unimpressed by it. Ugh. It's probably all gross and stuff. Well, she wasn't wrong there. In the show and manga at this point, Naruto did live in a disorganized and messy style of a tiny apartment. I wasn't going to bring up my own living arrangements with Naruto's taking attention right now. Or Sasuke's living arrangements. Did it really matter that much when they were effectively the same? Naruto looked unfazed. But it's cool, Sakura. I really hoped he was talking about living on his own and not how much trash he must have that he didn't have to bother to clean up. I only rolled my eyes a bit. We settled into another boring lull of waiting with various levels of patience. Eventually, Kakashi had to show up. It was only a matter of time, but I wasn't impressed by how long it felt. This was realistic in the worst way. Naruto sat up again and darted over to the door where he opened it to peer out. Where is this guy? Everyone else had their sensei show up hours ago and Naruto's gone. That was different. Naruto left to go look, I pointed out. Not that he'd find Kakashi, since the Jonin was probably somewhere in the building if this was actually on schedule according to the show. That would still be a sight to see though, just the idea of Iruka getting on Kakashi's case for being late was tantalizing, given how many horror stories I had heard from other grads who were working as TAs and had ended up working under perennially late professors who no longer had any fucks to give thanks to achieving tenure sometime in the 80s. Shame it would never happen and wasn't actually real in any event. I really hope Iruka-sensei shows back up or our new sensei does, Sakura said wistfully. Even her tolerance for trying to behave and be an obedient student was starting to fray. Maybe I should prank him. Naruto declared. This guy deserves it after making us wait for so long. As entertaining as it could be to see Kakashi get an eraser to the head, I wasn't sure I wanted to see it as a dream. Also, with the luck I had so far, I wouldn't put it past a dream to have something else happen in retribution. Why not wait to prank our new sensei? I suggested. Eh? Naruto and Sakura both looked at me like I had grown a second head. In retrospect, it wasn't actually something Sasuke would normally say, was it? There's no way you can come up with a prank that would actually catch a Jonin unaware in a classroom when they have already know what kind of reputation you have, I said, doing my best to convey with tone how stupid the idea actually was. There's no way they're actually going to be that dumb. You vandalized the Hokage monument only a few days ago. Oh. Yeah. Naruto actually beamed. Between that and the whole thing with accidentally stealing a forbidden scroll, there's no way they don't know who I am. He actually sounded proud of himself. Sakura stared at Naruto like he was the crazy one now, attention shifted away from me. You did what? Yeah. I learned a cool new jutsu and saved Iruka-sensei, and then Iruka said I could be a ninja, and he gave me his headband and everything. I graduated just like that. That was the worst summary of the introductory chapter and episode that I had ever heard. It was actually impressive in a twisted way. If it was forbidden, it was probably forbidden for good reason. But it's so cool. Watch. He brought his hands together, ready to form a seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Before either Sakura or I could say anything, the room was filled to the point of being uncomfortably packed with dozens of Naruto clones. With that whole eat-up, I should have seen this coming. Huh. Interesting. Kakashi's voice came from the doorway. He was only able to lean in and look into the room due to the sea of Naruto clones, taking up every bit of available space. Of course he would show up now. I think I'll see you on the roof. He backed away and firmly closed the door. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse than his reaction in the show. Sakura punched Naruto, who burst into nothingness. I can't believe you scared our sensei away. She pouted at the realization she hadn't even hit the original. What? That guy. A few Narutos shouted together. At least those ones were mostly on the same page. The rest were beginning to chatter aimlessly, making the room an orange-themed din. Who else is it going to be? Sakura pointed out, pushing a jostled clone away. He did just say to meet him on the roof. Can you just dispel all of your clones already? I said, not entirely sure where to direct this point. Two of them were making faces at me, perched on top of the desk. I didn't appreciate this. Fine. I was just trying to prove it was nothing bad, you know. A Naruto shouted, before getting accidentally shoved by another Naruto. After a moment of squawking, all but one disappeared. I guess this dream refused to be anything but zero-sum at a minimum where Naruto was concerned. I'm not sure being crammed into a room with dozens of you isn't bad, Sakura muttered, before trying to perk back up. We should go meet him. Naruto pulled a face. He's the one who made us wait forever and you want to rush right up there? But you want to wait any longer in this room? I pointed out. I didn't want to, that was for sure. Especially not if this dream was going to continue to poke ass and go as slow as it was. His eyes widened. No. And with that, he scrambled, running out the door. I realized my error soon enough. I turned to see Sakura was staring at me, hands clasped together. "We can walk up together, since Naruto left." "That was so smart of you," she said. I could practically feel the intensity of her crush rolling off her in waves, and it took everything in my power to not physically cringe. "We should hurry up," I answered, and instead walked over to the door, opening it. I didn't close it fast enough to avoid seeing Sakura look visibly crushed, hanging her head at the failed attempt as she trailed after me. It made me feel like I kicked a puppy. Again, this made me realize I didn't actually really know how to get around here. Just like earlier, I tried to not think too hard about where I was actually going, letting the dream steer me instead. Thankfully, it didn't get me or Sakura, since she was following me with a hangdog look lost, and we made it to the roof with no trouble. After everything else, that felt like a minor miracle as far as this dream was concerned. Looking at the roof from this vantage point was actually interesting, compared to how it was shown from only specific shots. The fact that it required someone to think planting trees on a roof was a viable design choice was something I had always wondered about. Sure, it looked cool for something drawn, but could you use trees this big in real life on a roof, too? And the large arches that were probably supposed to be for some kind of partial shade canopy were sort of fascinating, but from standing there, it looked different and made it possible to almost forget you were a few stories up. I guess that was the point of the trees. Naruto was already hassling Kakashi when we found them. "Moon, who are you?" he demanded from his seat on the wide stone steps. Kakashi was lazily perched on the railing ahead of him, arms folded over his chest. Kakashi's visible eye closed, crinkling in a smile. "You didn't want to wait for your teammates?" he asked. "Well, they're here now," Naruto insisted. Sakura sat down first and looked disappointed when I sat down on the other side of Naruto. Kakashi shrugged, unfolding his arms as he did to hold his hands palm up. "Why don't you begin with introductions?" Sakura looked at him with wide eyes. "You want us to introduce ourselves? How do you mean?" She was taking it a bit too seriously. "Oh, you know," Kakashi answered. "Things you like, don't like. Dreams for the future. Hobbies." He cocked his head slightly for the briefest moment, as though he was wondering if there was anything else to add. "That sort of thing." "What?" "Hey. You should introduce yourself first. We don't even know who you are," Naruto insisted. "I already asked." "Fine, then," Kakashi answered. "My name is Hada Kakashi. And I don't feel like telling you what I like or dislike. I have hobbies." "You skipped bringing up your future," I said, deadpan. I was pretty certain that he had at least brought up something about that in the show. "Or is that something you don't care about?" You could say that. Well, damn. I wasn't expecting that sort of bald-faced admittance of nihilism. I was almost impressed. That practically made Kakashi an honorary millennial. Looking at the other two though, it seemed that Naruto and Sakura were more slightly horrified at the concept of not caring about having a future at this point in their young lives. "Why don't you go first, then? All you told us was your name," Naruto interrupted. "And mental state," Sakura muttered, under her breath. It was her turn to get stared at blankly. While I didn't disagree, Kakashi and Naruto apparently had no idea how to process that sort of commentary coming from the pink-haired girl. The silence was starting to become awkward and I felt obligated, like I was increasingly obligated to say something. "You should already know my name, and if you don't have to say anything about yourself, I don't need to either." As I felt all the attention shift onto me, I realized that was probably pushing the bounds of what I should have said. It was too late to take back. Right. I wondered how much this version of Kakashi regretted everything. "You then," he said to Naruto, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm Yuzuma." Naruto cut himself off. "Wait. Is this some kind of trick? Is that why he didn't answer anything?" He looked at Kakashi suspiciously. "Are we being tested again?" Had I broken the introductions? Kakashi laughed to himself for a moment. "Let's just skip the introductions then," he said, straightening up. "You're right. There is another test." I knew it. I had broken the introductions. But this wasn't it. All the humor had dropped from his voice. "Of the 27 graduates from your class, only 9 will become genin. The other 18 will be sent back to the academy. That means there's a 66% chance you'll fail." Naruto's jaw dropped in shock. But we worked hard to get here, didn't we? What was the point of everything else if we have to do another test? "Well, we needed genin candidates, didn't we?" "What?" Kakashi shrugged aimlessly. "It's how it works. I decide if you pass or fail. Meet me at the designated training tomorrow morning at 5 am with all of your ninja tools." I started to hear ringing. Where was that coming from? "Oh, and don't even think about eating breakfast in the morning. Unless you want to puke it all right back up." Kakashi pulled out a few sheets of paper from his flak jacket as he walked towards us. "The details are all here. Don't be late tomorrow." I could barely hear what he was saying. It was getting louder and louder. That tough. I couldn't hear anything else. I blinked at the unexpected early pre-dawn light, muted and gray, the beginning undertones of pink not yet reaching into the sky. Before me, Sakura was yawning and Naruto was mid-stretch, both with full bags on them. It was the training ground for the bell test. Not this again. The last dream had only been yesterday night. I wasn't sure whether that was better or worse than having a longer gap, but what I did know is I wasn't a fan of the fact that this was apparently becoming a recurring thing. I wondered vaguely if it meant I should give in to my grandmother and tell her I actually needed her prayers for once, for these strange dreams. Asking her to stop it all was out of the question, but it would at least redirect her away from my lack of a love life. The last time I had gone over there my aunt went out of the way to inform me the candles at the altar were for me. Right, Naruto said, far too loudly. I can't believe he's late. He shrugged his bag straps off his shoulders, allowing it to fall onto the ground with a muffled clatter, and scuffed at the ground with the side of his sandal, before dropping onto his bag to sit on it. How is he supposed to teach us if he can't even show up at the time he told us? Sakura slowly slumped onto the ground. I can't believe I woke up at 3 just to get ready and he's not even here. You woke up at 3? I couldn't help but ask. I had to take a shower and do my hair, she said, sounding mulish even as she defended herself. I actually exchanged a look with Naruto, though he looked more baffled than horrified. I just couldn't believe she decided to get up that early for that much effort for this. My own sleep hygiene might not be the best, but that was just excessive. Waking up that early just to do your hair is just going to put you at a disadvantage if you're exhausted, I said, trying to approach this delicately. Did you at least go to sleep early enough to make up for it? Sakura blushed and turned to look away. Right. I would have to take that as a no, then. I double-checked that I packed my bag with all of my ninja tools and made sure they were in good condition, she said, still pink in the face. And I practiced last night. Naruto pumped a fist. I refused to go back to the academy, you know. I stared at him. I had no idea what Sasuke would have done the night before, but as far as I was concerned, the most important thing to do before any kind of test was to actually get sleep. Cramming was for the desperate and if you had to cram, you were probably screwed anyways. Then again, that seemed to be Naruto's general approach if the canon was anything to go by. And how the dream version behaved. This had to be some subconscious nonsense, though I couldn't possibly guess what it would mean in this context, disguised as anime and manga characters. Right. I looked down at the packed bag hanging at my own side and wondered what was going to be inside it. I couldn't remember right now what they made serious use of in the original version of the bell test, just that Kakashi's serious issue with Team 7 was based in the lack of teamwork. Kunai? Maybe some shuriken. At the same time though, I could swear that was just what they already had on them, instead of taking anything from their bags, probably because Kakashi was so severely above their skill level, it meant the attempted fights were basically nothing. There were a few traps, but I might have gotten that mixed up with Kakashi's actions, since I was pretty sure he had showcased everything but summoning and sealing. I ended up lowering into a sitting position, slipping the shoulder strap off and pulling it into my lap to actually take a look inside the bag's main compartment. It was surprisingly filled and well organized, with multiple arrays of shuriken and a few braces of kunai being the most obvious things inside, but there were also a couple coils of what I assumed was ninja wire, along with a few that were plain rope. I looked over at Sakura and Naruto. What did you two bring? Naruto stood up, opened his bag, and then lifted it, only to flip it over, dumping its contents onto the ground. Duller mismatched kunai that looked like they had been scavenged or bought at different times and uncared for shuriken with chipped edges and streaks of rust made up the majority of the weaponry he had brought with him, but the rest of the pile was more eclectic. Apparently he was used to using it for more than just ninja gear. The plastic bottles of paint were one thing, same with the thicker ropes that he probably would have used for successfully graffiting the Hokage monument, and a few already previously used and rinsed out wide sash paintbrushes, but I had no idea why there was a package of tofu in there, ominous green blobs floating under the thin plastic. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. Did you bring rotten tofu? Sakura asked, her color looking wan. The sight must have killed her appetite as well. Why? Not on purpose. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. I must have forgot to take everything out of my bag. I think the tofu is from the last time I got groceries. I looked at the package of tofu with an unsure expression. There was no way that thing could have been in there for only a short bit of time. How long ago was that? About 2 weeks ago? Naruto didn't sound particularly sure of himself. The earlier wanness in Sakura's face started to take on a green tinge. I really hope she didn't throw up. That's been buried in your bag for 2 weeks. Naruto crossed his arms, looking away from her, an embarrassed look on his face. It's not like I did it on purpose, you know. How many times could it have gotten punctured or opened in the last 2 weeks? You've been walking around with a spoiled food bomb while we've been getting ready to graduate. That was starting to get into some serious hypotheticals. Not on purpose. I didn't want to think about how much growth was inside for it to be bulging the way it was. Or how it looked so ominously green even under the plastic top. The focus on the tofu was beginning to get to me and I could feel my stomach begin to churn. I tried to shift attention away from the deathly looking tofu. "Sakura, what did you bring?" Her eyes widened and she looked back at me, blushing again. I really wished she would knock that off, but I had the suspicion that as long as I was having these dreams it wasn't going to stop. "Oh. Let me show you, Sasuke," she said, her voice going higher as she tried to sound flirtatious. At least, I assumed that was what she was trying to aim for. That was actually worse than the blushing. Unlike Naruto, Sakura carefully pulled everything out, laying everything down in orderly rows. She had brought mostly kunai and not very many shuriken, but other than it being a thing of ratios, what she had packed was pretty much the same as what was in mine, except for the ninja wire. If this wasn't a dream, I would have guessed it would have been because the academy would suggest a standard list of gear to have and carry. Sakura was the type who probably followed the list exactly, regardless of actual needs. As far as Sasuke's gear went, all of the extra shuriken made sense, even though I could only make the assumption that it was because it was a specialty. At least as far as baby would-be ninja could have specialties. Naruto, on the other hand, was just Naruto. Since he isn't here yet we could set the field up for our advantage, I said, thinking. It at least made more sense than what I suspected was going to happen as far as my perception of time went with this dream. I wasn't exactly looking forward to dreaming about being bored and feeling like it took hours. Eh? What do you mean? Naruto squinted at me suspiciously. Oh. Sakura looked eager. It's a test, right? And he had us bring our ninja gear. Do you think he's going to have us fight him or something? I think so, I lied, vaguely. The bell test was more Kakashi messing with them engaging teamwork than a straight-up fight, but I wasn't going to tell them that. I didn't want to deal with their questions any more than I did the last time I dreamed about them. Naruto bounced on his feet. Leave him to me. Sakura's eyebrows crinkled together as she looked at him. You really think you can beat a jounin on your own? We just graduated. And you didn't even pass the exam. No, but I beat Mizuki-sensei. I can do this. He balled one of his fists in determination. What? Poor Sakura. Without context, none of this had to make sense. Especially not when it was combined with Naruto's somewhat disjointed way of telling stories. Yeah. That's how I saved Iruka-sensei. So I got his headband. Even I was beginning to have a hard time tracking this. Whose headband? I thought you said you got Iruka-sensei's. I did. I decided I should try to redirect the conversation before Naruto got any more confusing. If we're supposed to fight him, we won't stand a chance if he takes it seriously, much less on our own. You think we should work together? Sakura was staring at me a bit too hard, her hands clasped together. I don't think she was imaging the same sort of thing I was thinking. I moved backwards. Do we have any other choice? I asked. As I asked, it occurred to me I had no idea how the dream logic was going to work when it came to actually trying to fight. The haphazard various classes I took when I was younger sure as hell didn't apply to ninja stuff, but the last few times I had stopped trying to focus too much on anything in these dreams, it was like I had gone on automatic. Would it work out like that again? My question wasn't enough to discourage whatever Sakura was thinking, but it seemed to have triggered something in Naruto. I'll be better than you at working together. I stared at him for a moment before I decided to just give up and accede to whatever he thought he was saying. That doesn't really make sense as an answer, but alright then. Fine. Sure you will. I looked at the horizon, which was already hinting at the promise of a clear blue sky. If he takes as long as he did yesterday, it's going to be a few hours until he even shows up. Naruto's eyes widened. Wait. We could have eaten anyways. He kicked at one of the wooden posts. I wondered if those were there only for Kakashi's test, or if they were a usual thing for the field. I shrugged. It wasn't like I actually knew Kakashi's logic, even between the show and manga. Sakura hung her head when her stomach grumbled at the idea of eating. I should have eaten dinner. I had honestly forgotten about that part with her unhealthy diet scheme. Naruto looked at her in shock. What? Why wouldn't you eat dinner? Because I'm trying to maintain my figure. What figure? Naruto sounded genuinely baffled. Sakura's eyes narrowed in Naruto's direction. Shanro. I dragged a hand down my face as Naruto got decked. You can't just not eat besides, that's for what would make sense most here. Right. Civilians who don't do anything and eat too much. If you don't eat enough of the right food while training or on missions, after a while your body's just going to start eating itself and waste away. That's not the kind of skinny you want to be. What, like a cannibal? Naruto sounded horrified, staring between me and then Sakura. He had bounced right back from getting punched. Sakura's going to cannibalize herself. He stepped away from her, now. Funny how that made him more fearful than her fists. What? Sakura looked disgusted. No. Ugh. That's so gross, Naruto. You. Naruto levered a pointed finger at her. You're the one who's gonna become a cannibal. I regretted ever speaking. I could always try to deflect, but I had a feeling that it would only get worse. That goes for you, too. Eh? The blonde looked at me in confusion. Now, do you even know what a vegetable is? Yeah. I do eat them, sometimes. He said, huffily. They're in my ramen. You can't just live off of ramen, either, I pointed out. Naruto gave me a suspicious look. You're sounding like Iruka-sensei. Did he put you up to this? When would he have done that? Sakura was confused. She wasn't the only one. I stared at him with dismay. It doesn't change what I said, unless you feel like staying short forever. Naruto looked scandalized at the suggestion. There's no way I'm gonna be some kinda midget Hokage. Then start diversifying your diet, I said, stressing the word, and then looking at Sakura and make sure you're actually eating what you need to be. I didn't sign up to play at giving advice in my dreams, but apparently that's how it was going to be. It also made me wonder if in-universe Sakura's parents would even know she was skipping meals or anything. And again, it wasn't like tweens and young teenagers weren't crafty. I think I liked it better when you were just a jerk who kept to himself, Naruto muttered. Sakura looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of that. I only shrugged. Naruto's attention landed on everything we had laid out again. Hey. What if we made a bunch of traps and stuff? That should work. Especially if he takes forever to get here. It's practically a prank. I suddenly felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for not just Kakashi, but Iruka as well, before I realized that Kakashi was the instrument by which I was being made to suffer from boredom in what could have been a far more interesting dream. Iruka had at least been inspiring. Kakashi, on the other hand, was Kakashi. Most of my sympathy for him evaporated. Why not? Sakura looked at Naruto with one eyebrow raised, uncertainty playing on her face. What if we get in trouble? If he didn't want us to rig the field in our favor for whatever he's going to have us do, he would have shown up on time, was my reasoning. If he didn't want us to do certain things, he would have explicitly said as much. It probably didn't count as cheating if it was all during the preparatory period he had accidentally left us. I was choosing to view this as being more like an open book exam if it was like anything. And if we don't have to fight him? She pointed out. On top of whatever nerves she must have had over the possibility of being sent back to the academy, I really must have ruined her mood if she wasn't immediately agreeing with her precious Sasuke in an attempt to score favor. Then we either take everything down after he leaves or we leave it all up as a surprise for whoever trains here next. Not that that was particularly ethical, but besides the fact I doubted it would be that lethal, it wasn't like it would matter in a dream. Sakura made a face. We're supposed to take everything down once we're finished using any training locations, she said, sounding like she was reciting something from memory. Yeah? Naruto exclaimed, again, ignoring Sakura's comment entirely. We'll put up a bunch of traps everywhere, and then we'll beat him, and then he's going to have to accept us as his students. He was way too excited for this time of morning, to the point where I was beginning to wonder if Naruto was actually a morning person. Could dream people even be morning people or night owls? I had no idea where would be the best place, or even where to start with trapping things to put Kakashi at a disadvantage, and everything about Sakura probably meant she wouldn't either. You're the local menace, I said, looking at Naruto. How should we do this? His eyes widened, and he inhaled as he looked at our surroundings with an expression that I couldn't quite pin at first, before I realized it was intense focus. It wasn't exactly the sort of expression you saw on most middle school-aged kids, much less the kind that were full of energy and easily distracted. He took in the field we were in, the wooded area surrounding the field, and the river that was serving as a boundary. Finally, he exhaled. Well, it's 3 against 1, so that means we're the ones who are gonna have to pay real close attention. Sakura stared at him as she tried to figure out what kind of logic Naruto was even using, and eventually gave up. I hadn't even bothered to try to figure it out. Don't you mean him? We're the ones who have the number advantage. No. Because see, if you're doing a prank, it gets more complicated with more people, see? Naruto was really getting excited. It's harder to keep track like that. That's why whenever the old man sends people out after me when I get in trouble on my own, it's so easy to get rid of them. They get all mixed up and I can send them down the wrong direction and they all go running. He started to laugh. Even though they're all chunin and even some jounin. That explained some of his earlier unwarranted confidence. Then, if he was equating his ability to evade much more experienced ninja in the village with meaning he could also fight them. They have to keep track of everyone else, try to find me, not get mixed up with whatever anyone else is trying to do to catch me, and get all tangled up. All I have to do is not get caught. That sounded a bit too simplistic, but I was starting to see where he was coming from. I mean, it's harder if Kiba and Shikamaru are with me, but it's doable. We usually only get caught if Shikamaru gets bored of hiding and gives up. Because they aren't coordinating even though they're on the same task, I said, realizing. They're just working in parallel. And in the story Konoha was known for teamwork. How, again? Yeah. Naruto looked cheered on that someone had actually understood what he was trying to get at. If we really want to get him good, we can't do that. It'd go faster if we split up, but then we wouldn't know who put what traps where, right? Which means any of us could set them off by accident instead of him. On the one hand, it made sense that Naruto would know what strategy could be, considering all the trouble he was supposed to have gotten into before graduating. On the other hand, apparently he didn't know he even knew what strategy was if it wasn't in the context of making a nuisance of himself. No wonder Iruka would spend so much time on him if this was the sort of stuff he would come up with instead of focusing in class. He was trying to keep the village from going into full riot over one pint-sized delinquent prankster. I don't know about this, Sakura said, hesitating. What if it makes him unhappy with us? He's the one who had us show up at 5 in the morning and isn't even here yet, I told her. He has no room to talk. Yeah. If he didn't want us to use this extra time, he would have shown up. That was a bit of a stretch on Naruto's part, but he wasn't really wrong, in that sense. All of this was on him, when it came down to it. Then, what should we do? Sakura asked. She sounded reluctant to address Naruto, but I had basically put him in charge of this by prompting him in the first place. Naruto looked at all of the gear and then the landscape again. We don't want to do this out in the open, he decided. The trees will be better. He's a lot bigger than us, and traps don't work that great without some way to blend them in anyhow. We can at least hide and distract him a lot better in there, instead. He gave a considering look at the ninja wire. I don't know about using the ninja wire for this though, it might be too risky. How do you mean? Sakura asked. Well, if you're not using it as a weapon on purpose, you've got to be careful with it, right? It's really easy to cut yourself on it even by accident if you use too much force. And if you don't know where you've used it, you're gonna get caught in it. And like I said, we're the ones at a disadvantage, so we don't want to use something we could get tangled up in so easy, Naruto explained. I wasn't sure how I felt about Naruto being able to actually use logic. Would using ropes stand out too much? Well, what Sakura and I had wasn't that thick, I didn't believe for a moment that Kakashi wouldn't manage to spot them. Not if you do it right. Naruto rubbed his hands together. That was ominous. In the end, we packed everything back up and went into the woods, letting Naruto take the lead and dictate what kind of traps to use and where. The further from the grass we got, the more it slowly became apparent why Naruto's kunai and shuriken looked like they did. He had no qualms about using them. Naruto wasn't afraid of abusing his weaponry. He was using his kunai to score marks into the trees or pin thinned and untwined pieces of rope into the trunks and branches of trees and was driving them deep into the ground. Occasionally he would look around before running off to stare at something from a different vantage point and toss a kunai or shuriken from there to check something or plant them in spots that were blatantly obvious compared to where he actually strung something or set things up to launch if triggered. At one point he hauled himself into a questionable looking tree with yellowed leaves only to balance precariously on a narrow branch that was barely able to hold his weight with one hand gripping an even more spindly one above him. He stood there and jumped until we heard a cracking sound as the branch threatened to break below him before he leapt out of it and made the other tree branches look unappealing or blatantly look like traps. He had Sakura and I plant obvious tripwires on the ground below, making estimates on what would urge Kakashi into the trees at the right distance. It was a bit terrifying to watch him go at it. He didn't even seem to be aware of how much thought he was putting into everything, just naturally making adjustments naturally based on whatever obstacle he had added before or would result in a forced course correction. Eventually, Naruto looked satisfied with the level of preparation he had put into it. He had lightened his bag in the process and made similar dents in the others. Won't he notice our bags look empty? Sakura wondered, looking at hers and mine before looking at Naruto's. His was practically empty in comparison. Well, we can either stuff them with something or just ignore it and see if he ignores it too, I answered. I wasn't entirely sure that Kakashi would ignore it if it looked suspicious enough, but he was apathetic half the time in the series, so in theory it could work out. Then again, he was making these dreams a pain in my ass, so maybe not. Oh yeah. That's easy. Naruto climbed into one of the trees again and before we could ask what he was doing, began to shake leaves, twigs, and other random debris left by birds and other creatures out. Just put some stuff in there and some rocks. He probably won't look inside unless you make him think something funny's up. Why do I get the feeling you've done this before? I asked dryly. He laughed and rubbed the back of his head, still dropping things out of the tree. I'd have forgotten to pack everything a couple times when we had shuriken practice and borrowed from Kiba after the first time I got yelled at. The teachers don't care if they don't notice. Sakura looked about as impressed as expected. Ugh, I wish I was surprised. No wonder your kunai and shuriken look so awful. I couldn't believe what I was going to say. No, it's because he's actually been using them outside of practice, I told her. Did you see what he was doing the whole time? His aim wasn't always the greatest when he had been doing this, but if watching him lay traps in the woods was any indication, my guess was that this dream's Naruto was actually used to using them like actual tools, and not just as school supplies. In the name of being a goddamn delinquent, apparently, but still. Naruto suddenly stopped, mid-motion. I didn't like the expression on Naruto's face, up in the tree. It wasn't like Sakura or Ino's expressions when they were looking my way, but it was making me realize I had made a serious miscalculation by defending him. It was too close to praise for Naruto. See? Even Sasuke can't tell. Naruto said. Forget dreams, I felt like I was going to have nightmares about this. I never wanted this. Sakura flushed pink, pouting. Well, still. I sighed and grabbed a few of the longer branches Naruto had dropped to twine them with loose bits of rope into a questionable basket frame, sitting down. It didn't have to be that large, since the bag Sasuke, not me, had wasn't that large, compared to Naruto or Sakura's bulkier things. I couldn't believe that this, the one thing I had ever learned and bothered to remember from attending a day camp, was getting used for a dream of all things. Even my mother hadn't appreciated the skill I had picked up. And again, it wasn't like we had the room for baskets upon baskets upon baskets, and she was probably expecting something she could put on the fridge or put away with the rest of the things she insisted on keeping as memories. The vast majority of my questionable baskets from that summer had ended up distributed to various aunts and uncles, and even a few cousins. Naruto looked down. What are you doing? He shouted. I don't feel like stuffing my bag with all of that, so I'm going to make a basket frame so it just looks full, I explained. Sakura looked intrigued. It had to be more appealing than bulking her bag up with random debris. Can you show me how? Hey. Me too. Me too. I glanced around to see if he had dropped any more suitable branches before I answered. It looked like there wasn't quite enough. I guess. Grab some more thin branches that are about the length of your arm, I told him, looking upwards. Naruto immediately snapped a few off and dropped to the ground. Even from the ground the damage was apparent. We had really denuded that poor tree. Hey Sasuke. Show us now. I had not expected this to devolve into ninja arts and crafts, but here I was. Fine. I motioned for them both to come closer and demonstrated. It wasn't going to look pretty at all. I was half-assing it pretty strongly, and if I was trying to make a real basket, it probably would have fallen apart after too long, but for what I was trying to do, it just needed to stay in place, inside the bag. You need to have at least two crossing each other like this, and then bind them at the center, I explained. I had significantly less trouble picking it up with my rusty instructions than I initially had under the instruction of an 18-year-old getting paid minimum wage. Then again, they were also significantly less clumsy. Finger dexterity went a long way with something this fiddly. In between some vague corrections, we started to brainstorm on how to lead Kakashi into the trees if we did have to fight him. It wasn't long before we had managed to carefully shove the questionably made skeletal frames into our bags, all of them held together with the barest amount of branches and rope tied together. My 8-year-old self would have been horrified at such haphazard work. It was still probably far more effort than needed to throw Kakashi off, but it was better than sitting around dreaming about being bored. I still couldn't believe he hadn't shown up yet, but it was still relatively early in the morning, if not quite painfully so. After a short shakedown to reduce as much evidence of our plotting as possible, mostly on Naruto's part, considering he had what seemed like half a tree sticking out of his hair and the collar of his jacket, we ended up returning to the open part of the training ground. We ended up sitting or lying, in Naruto's case on the grass again, looking out in different directions, trying to see if Kakashi was ever going to show up. The sun had managed to trek further into proper daytime before the complaints started to kick in. I should have eaten dinner, I should have gone to bed early, I should have not woken up so early, Sakura said, out loud. I could have eaten breakfast, Naruto groaned. I could eat so many bowls of Ichirakus right now. I wasn't going to tell them I felt fine. They probably wouldn't appreciate it. I can't believe we're still waiting. I paused as a thought crossed my mind. I wasn't sure why it had bothered to show up. Do you think we could petition for a different jounin? Oh, you want to get rid of me already? We haven't even started the test yet. When the hell did he get here? Naruto jumped to his feet with impressive speed for starting from lying down. What? You're the one who made us wait forever, again. Kakashi idly glanced at the alarm clock in his hand, only looking at the bells. It's only what, 9:15. He also had a backpack on. I wondered what he had in there. If this was real, it would be his dirty romances. You told us to be here at 5. Sakura joined in, now. Did I? Kakashi asked casually. He was taking too much joy in this. Yes. Naruto was fired up. Oh well. Kakashi shrugged effusively. Let's get started. He set the clock down on top of the middle wooden post. The time on that says 10:08, I noted. I looked at the clock when I left, he answered. Sakura's eyelid began to twitch. Kakashi pressed down on the top of the alarm, activating it. It's set for noon, he told us, as he lazily pulled a string pair of bells from one of his pockets. This shouldn't be too hard for you, he said. The man was a goddamn tease. All you have to do is take these bells from me before noon. He jingled them together, letting them chime. Those who can't do it won't get lunch. If you can't, you'll be tied to those posts and I'll eat my lunch right in front of you. Naruto gripped his head with his hands and Sakura held onto her stomach. I was starting to wonder if I wasn't feeling hungry because it was a dream or if Sasuke had cheated. Either way, watching this play out and not on a screen or on paper really amplified how much of a jerk move it was on Kakashi's part. You only have to get one bell. Since there's two, at minimum one of you will get tied up. Kakashi met all of our eyes in turn. And whoever doesn't take a bell fails the mission. So someone's getting sent back to the academy regardless. As far as inspiring fear of failure went, he was succeeding in it where Sakura and Naruto were concerned, all while smiling. I wanted to be able to do that someday. For now, I'd have to just settle for vaguely worrying freshmen who only realized there were consequences to their illegal underage drinking and sudden uncontrolled freedom, with only a few heavily weighted papers and the final exam left and none of the reading done. Or it could be two of you, or even your whole team. You can use all of your weapons, including shuriken. If you're not prepared to come at me with killing intent, you won't be able to take the bells. Isn't that dangerous? Sakura asked, nervously. I guess she hadn't really mentally accepted the possibility of us fighting him, even with all of the traps we had laid. Yeah, you're so lazy you couldn't even get here in time. Naruto said, trying to laugh it off. I've noticed that those who tend to complain aren't skilled enough. Wait. Well, that was intended to be a diss towards Naruto, didn't that comment apply to Obito, too? That was something he had originally said, wasn't it? Kakashi really did have problems. Just ignore dead last here and Naruto pulled a kunai from his leg holster and ready to throw it at him, halfway into a lunge to give it proper thrust. Even with knowing what came next, I was still unprepared for how fast Kakashi cleared the distance between us and soon had Naruto by the head in one hand, the other gripping the blonde's wrist, angling the kunai at the back of Naruto's neck. Don't be in such a rush. I hadn't said start yet, Kakashi said, just slightly more quietly and slowly than he had spoken in before. Naruto grimaced, trying to pull away, but didn't succeed until Kakashi finally let him go. The vague focus Kakashi had put on display vanished just as suddenly as it had appeared. You did at least come at me with the intent to kill, he commented, lazily. So, I think I'm actually starting to like you guys. What a small mercy. Get ready and start. It wasn't until I was mid-leap that I realized I had no idea what the hell I was doing. As much as I was confused by that autonomous response, I still headed straight for the trees. We had agreed upon a spot, but now I realized I wasn't sure if the other two were going to stick to the plan anymore. Sakura might if she wasn't too rattled by Kakashi's insistence at us making a serious attempt at killing him, but Naruto was rightfully upset at Kakashi, revealing that in front of everyone and making fun of him for it. That alone made him more unpredictable than he might have otherwise been. And again, I was trying to apply serious analysis to fictional characters in a dream, so I was the real fool here. I hauled myself into the tree we had decided on as a meeting point. To my surprise, Sakura was already in it, only a glint of pink spoiling her hiding spot in the leafiest part of the crown of the tree. I settled onto a branch below her, leaning against the trunk where it was slightly more shaded. Sasuke. She hissed to me. Did you see Naruto? I shook my head. Ugh. I hope he didn't go off to do his own thing, she said, exasperated. I can't believe he actually tried to attack our sensei like that. He's trying to provoke us, I said, thinking. Naruto's always trying to be annoying, she said, trying to agree with me. Not him, Kakashi, I explained. He's doing this on purpose. Telling us no food and making us get up early enough that we'd be hungry and somewhat tired by the time he even starts his test. On top of being late. Naruto just had the biggest button for him to push. You really think it's on purpose? She asked, dubiously. She still wanted to place her full faith in adults in the educational system. Even I didn't place any faith in the educational system. Right now. Absolutely. After minutes of tense waiting, I spied Orange through the leaves, which coalesced into Naruto's shape coming in from the right. At least, I hoped it was him. I realized with a start that it could have been a hinge. Naruto already knew where we were supposed to meet and I didn't think he would be trying to come from the side with how much Kakashi had riled him up. He wasn't that subtle. This was seeking behavior and neither of us were particularly well hidden. I hadn't accounted for that possibility earlier. Hey. The possibly Naruto shouted from the ground before he joined us in the tree. Narrow eye motioned for Sakura to stop talking and she cut herself off almost immediately. What? The blonde looked confused. I looked at him suspiciously. What did you do yesterday that Kakashi wouldn't know about? Huh? What do you mean? Oh. When Sakura. She had caught on. What did you do yesterday when we went to lunch? I asked again. A nervous laugh was the answer. I had Raymond. Why are you asking? Nice try, but wrong. Sakura's gasp was cut off by the pop of smoke as Kakashi ended the hinge. So much for research, he said, idly. The bells were in one of his hands, which he jangled at us. Sakura bolted from the tree first, heading into the direction of the first layer of traps. I lunged at Kakashi's center of gravity, and even though I mentally prepared for him to dodge, he was out of sight before I even had a chance to finish the thought. The bells tinkled teasingly above me. Ah, you weren't putting all of your effort into that. You're going to need to try harder than that, he said. First in class means nothing out in the real world. Not with your brother out there. I didn't really know how to respond to that one. At bare minimum it was actually a ridiculously awful thing to say to anyone, much less an assumed child. Hey. Naruto's indignant shout saved me the effort of having to come up with anything beyond being vaguely dismayed at Kakashi's lack of social skills. I'm not done with you, you bastard. He was running through the treetops, a kunai in hand. You're kind of late, I yelled in his direction. Wait. I should probably arm myself too, shouldn't I? Well, I reached into my Sasuke's leg holster. Kakashi dropped onto the same branch I was into a crouch, swinging his leg out in a wide and low kick that was intended to knock me out of the tree. Without entirely being aware of the decision, I leapt barely in time to avoid it. He kicked me into the river. Naruto threw his kunai at Kakashi. There was a clink of metal against metal, and I realized at the same time that not only had Kakashi thrown something to deflect it, it was now angled in my direction. I wasn't quite at the point where I preferred the bizarre repeat dreams about showing up to work late and discovering the whole campus had vanished and that I needed to cross country to find my advisor somewhere in the middle of Vermont on Poncho Villa's behalf, but we were getting there. I dropped out of the tree. I didn't trust that going for Kakashi wouldn't just result in him kicking me back in the direction of the kunai's path. It seemed like the sort of behavior he would indulge in. Kakashi looked down at me from the tree, not even blinking as the kunai whizzed past his head. Not giving up already, are you? He asked. I briefly wondered how terrible an idea the fireball jutsu would be to use in an area like this, filled with trees, before I dismissed it. Do you need a nap or something? I returned. I'm not that old, Kakashi answered. It almost sounded petulant. Naruto landed next to me. Try not to give him ammunition next time, will you? I said. It's not like I meant to. You know, Kakashi drawled, I'm not sure how I feel about being talked under. He leapt down from the branch. We scattered. Or at least, I scattered. Naruto tried to throw a kunai at Kakashi again, except from far too close. What was he doing? Kakashi immediately deflected the kunai right back at Naruto, who disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The kunai pierced the rancid block of tofu, which squirted foul-looking off-green liquid both in Kakashi's direction and mine, before it fell to the ground, draining the rest of its mold-dappled liquid into the soil. I was just out of range and could barely resist the urge to gag at the smell. My stomach roiled in protest. Kakashi fared far worse. The liquid got him right in the mask. There was a brief moment as his visible eye widened, he made a gagging sound as he clasped his hands on his knees, actually dropping the bells, and I realized Naruto had made a serious tactical error, the reasons for which were slowly piecing together. If things weren't going to be wildly different before, they definitely were now. I ran for the bells, skidding past Kakashi to grab them, and bolted in the same direction Sakura had earlier. Run. Was the only thing I shouted before I went into the trees. Naruto joined me shortly after, laughing. Did you see that? We really got him. You just effectively stink-bombed a haddock at point-blank range, I told him, as everything came together. They're supposed to have a good sense of smell. I wasn't sure exactly what bit of the series I was remembering that from, but it seemed reasonable enough. He was only toying with us before this. Oh, yeah, Naruto went, his laughter cutting off entirely. I really messed that up, didn't I? We need a new plan, huh? He started to take the lead as we approached the trap section of woods. We had layered them too thick earlier to do anything but go single file. I wondered if this was going to backfire on us later. Probably. This was too much to get away with. Yeah. We should find Sakura and see if she has any ideas. Honestly, that wasn't a bad idea. Sounds fine to me. I wondered how much of a head start we had over Kakashi. Assuming that his moment of weakness was more a combination of utter shock and being temporarily overwhelmed from the smell, instead of actually being completely incapacitated, I doubted it would last that long. This was not going to be a great time. Something went off behind us. Naruto nervously laughed and sped up, pushing further ahead with his next leap ahead. How much trouble do you think we're in? We aren't dead, I answered, so maybe not that much. The tree ahead and to the right of us burst into flame, sending the shuriken speeding out from its trap in wild, unpredictable arcs. I barely tore my eyes away from staring at it before I missed the next branch and lost all momentum. I take that back. On the one hand, he might not be aiming directly at us, but I couldn't come up with any positives to this. Sakura. Naruto started shouting. We messed up. We messed up. What? What happened? Sakura's face peeked out from one of the few safe trees ahead, looking confused. Wasn't I supposed to try and use Genjutsu when he got in here? Within a few bounds, we reached the branch Sakura was waiting on, Naruto still speeding ahead. I was just surprised he was still able to remember where the safe path was. I grabbed at her wrist as we passed by, pulling her behind me, ignoring her surprised yell. Naruto stink bombed him, and now we're in deep trouble. I looked behind just long enough to make sure she was still following. In spite of her surprise and forced start, she was keeping up. But you have the bells, don't you? Doesn't that mean the test is over? Doesn't count. We pissed him off. I really should probably hand at least one of the bells off, but I had a feeling losing momentum right now would be a bad idea. But, evasion now, talking later. Naruto shouted. He was really taking playing team leader seriously. The tension only built as we went through the trees before Naruto came to a sudden stop, immediately turning around so quickly that I nearly clipped into him. Wah, Naruto. The tree's wrong, the tree's wrong. Back, was the only babbling explanation we got. What do you mean the tree's wrong? How can a tree be wrong? Sakura questioned. Even so, she was still at least taking Naruto's lead and was now ahead of me, just from having the advantage of that little bit of time to turn around sooner. From the vague direction we had left Naruto's wrong tree behind, we heard an exploding clash of metal bursting outward. That was definitely not a right tree. As far as I was aware, Naruto from the show wouldn't have been able to figure out Genjutsu at this point, so it left the question of how he had figured it out, but wasn't really the time. It turned out that trying to make a giant trap against a jounin of Kakashi's level was a bit beyond the skill level of completely fresh genin, even with some smarts and teamwork added. Who could possibly have guessed? After a while, I wasn't sure how long we had spent evading what were becoming increasingly close calls from our various traps being set off by Kakashi, but ahead of me, Sakura was beginning to flag. Let Sakura take the lead, I called up ahead to Naruto. We can't keep this pace up. I'm fine, she tried to insist. She sounded breathy even with her protest. Huh? Naruto looked back just long enough to glance at Sakura before he turned back around. One of the shuriken traps ahead went off, with barely enough time for any of us to stop before we jumped right into the thickest part of its stream. We were forced to stop, even if it was only for a moment. Sakura, you coulda said something. She huffed. I can keep up. She insisted. Well, I felt sweaty and I didn't want to think how disgusting from sweat Naruto's jumpsuit could be from all of this. Sakura was absolutely drenched. She looked exhausted and worn down. For now maybe, I pointed out. Take the lead. But Naruto was the one who laid all the traps. She tried. And? You were paying attention, too, weren't you? It's not like you're dumb, I pointed out. We're having too many close calls, Kakashi's playing with us, take the lead. I shoved one of the bells into one of her hands. She stared at me and then the bell in shock. Okay. She sounded a bit firmer. I threw the other one to Naruto. He was too busy staring at Sakura and barely realized it was heading towards him until the last moment, which sent him scrambling to grab it without falling out of the tree. Getting tired? Kakashi's voice floated out from somewhere. He didn't sound lazy. Sakura and Naruto's eyes widened. She steeled herself. Right. Without any further hesitation, Sakura jumped in the direction of the stream of shuriken, which stopped just before she reached it. Naruto had followed without a thought. I kept up the rear. I could have swapped with Naruto, but the idea didn't sit right with me. He was too easily distracted, and keeping him in the middle was better, since it was now obvious Kakashi had decided to change the terms of his test. We had turned them over entirely on our own, just by building what was now clear was an incredibly stupid death trap and stink bombing him, so it only stood to reason he would see it differently as well. Whatever the case was, we were probably going to be stuck at this until whenever it was noon. I realized with a start that I was getting way too invested in this. Sakura's approach turned out to be different in a way I didn't expect from Naruto's. She hadn't just paid attention to the safe path we had made, but the spots Kakashi had already set off. Instead of sticking to the single route we had made, she was sometimes carving through these weak points and sometimes forcing us to go through sections that were still rigged to trigger. It was a bizarre combination of intelligence and brute forcing what was basically a giant puzzle. Is it just me or is this starting to get easy? Naruto asked, mid-leap. Before I could even tell him to not tempt fate, the branch Sakura had just landed on broke under her. With a shout of surprise, she fell to the ground, Naruto roughly landing right after her. I was the only one who had the chance to stop and jump to join them. You really need to think before you say things like that, I muttered under my breath as I landed. It suddenly occurred to me that at some point in the last few seconds I had armed myself, a kunai in my offhand and shuriken in the other. I hadn't even noticed. Behind me, Sakura and Naruto were getting up. Interesting, Kakashi said as he emerged from the trees. His thumbs were hooked into his pockets. I experimentally threw a shuriken. He caught it on a finger. I don't know what I was expecting. Sakura and Naruto walked over to stand next to me, taking defensive positions. You three turned out very different from what I was expecting. His gaze leveled on all of us. From what I understood, I was supposed to be getting a loner prodigy, Sasuke. An unfocused troublemaker, Naruto. And a fangirl. Sakura. Well, technically right, I wondered if he was projecting again. Probably. In my opinion, none of you should be going back to the academy. Oh, I knew what was coming now. Sakura and Naruto cheered. None of you deserve to be shinobi. There we go, that was the other shoe I was expecting. What? Why? Naruto protested. Kakashi threw the shuriken behind him with a flick of his wrist. A few seconds later, we could hear the thud of kunai driving into a tree. You completely flouted the parameters of the test. He honestly had a point. We had done our own thing completely without much consideration for what he had planned. And in my case, I had even known what he had planned, so it was entirely on purpose. Hey. We still got the bells. Naruto protested. Did you, though? Sasuke was the one who grabbed them. He hadn't seen the handoff then. I opened my empty hands, holding the palms out to him. You never said that I had to keep the bells. As I said that, Sakura and Naruto pulled out the bells I had given to them. You didn't take the threat of being sent back to the academy that seriously, did you? He asked me. I can always recommend that you be completely dismissed instead and barred from becoming a shinobi. Unless, of course, you take the bells back and I'll just tell the Hokage the other two should be stripped of their status instead. That would have gone a long way in fomenting distrust and actually ruining everything if I was actually Sasuke. The other two gasped. Bastard. Naruto was glowering at Kakashi rather impressively now. I don't need to be a shinobi if it comes down to it, I said, frankly. I definitely didn't, and the whole series had underlined different avenues anyways, not that they really mattered. But Sakura looked torn. I think the Hokage is at least supposed to be a ninja, though. Otherwise Naruto would be the most embarrassing one ever. What? Naruto looked confused but turned his attention back on Kakashi. Hey, you bastard. You can't just make people pick like that, can't I? Kakashi asked, lazily. Before I even had time to process it, he moved forward and I was suddenly driven to the ground, dirt filling my mouth. It tasted like dirt, at least. Sakura. Kill Naruto or Sasuke dies. My head was held down at an angle where the only thing I could see was earth and Sakura and Naruto's feet. Ah. What? Shinobi make hard choices, Kakashi said. And they don't always have easy or obvious answers. Sometimes people will die based on your decisions. You three worked together today, but was it just from chance? Or because you were actually aware of the importance of teamwork? You're jounin', I said, spitting dirt out of my mouth. Kakashi helpfully ground me into the dirt again, making that earlier effort completely pointless. That had to be on purpose. He clearly held me partially accountable for the tofu incident. We're genin. Any fight against you is going to be so ridiculously weighed in your favor by default to the point of futility together, much less on our own. You would know all about that, wouldn't you? Kakashi said, idly from above me. And the two of you? What do you have to say for yourselves? My eyes widened as I felt a tip of cold metal poke against the back of my neck. This was starting to feel a bit too realistic for my tastes. I think you're a real asshole. Naruto's contribution was both completely indignant and useless. About teamwork, Kakashi elaborated, but I'll take that into consideration. Never. Naruto. I could see the scuffle of feet as one set stayed firm and another were dragged back from an attempted lunge. If you think teamwork is so important, then why are you trying to sabotage it? Sakura asked. She sounded extremely frustrated. What's the point of your stupid test anyways if it's set up so no one can pass it? Oh, this wasn't just turning into a vent, this was an honors student style breakdown. This was starting to devolve for her from potentially separated from her crush to first brush with failure for no real reason, but the whims of another. Have you even ever passed anyone? If this is how you run your stupid test, what's the point of a jounin instructor who doesn't want to teach? It's more of a required duty billet than a volunteer status, Kakashi said. He sounded slightly baffled that he was even explaining that to Sakura, whose voice had started to take on a shrill tone near the end. Any other last words? If you even think you're gonna stop any of us from being ninja, you're wrong. Naruto insisted. Believe it. I don't care how long or how hard we have to train, we'll make it. Even if I have to fight the old man over it. You don't get to play some stupid head games and try and make us fight each other and destroy our dreams. Is that really how you feel? Kakashi asked languidly. Yeah. Then, I guess you pass. The pressure on my head and the small of my back let up and I carefully sat up after spitting out the second helping of dirt. Once I confirmed that Kakashi wasn't just waiting to give me a third mouthful of forest soil, I stood up. What? Huh? That whole thing. Sakura cut herself off, though I couldn't help but notice that both of her hands were balled into fists. I wondered how far Kakashi would have to push before she eventually tried to punch him. Was a test. Kakashi's single visible eye crinkled into a smile. You're the first ones to pass. Everyone else has done what I've said, neglecting or even sacrificing their teammates. I knew it, Sakura muttered under her breath. Ninja must be able to see underneath the underneath. Those who break the rules are trash, Kakashi said, ignoring Sakura's comment inane me, but those who would abandon their teammates are worse than trash. What about the bells and alarm? Sakura asked. The fact that the test she thought was the focus wasn't what it was about at all, after what she'd been put through today was apparently still getting to her. She wasn't letting him get off that easy, apparently. Oh, I'd like the bells back. And as for the time, he gestured for us to look up. Past the treetops, the position the sun was in was far beyond what it should have been for noon. I groaned. What? Oh no, you were running for your lives an extra 3 hours, Kakashi said, cheerfully. Now, I'd love to let you all eat, but I didn't book this training ground for the full day, and they issue fines if there's too many weapons and the like left over. You have maybe an hour to clean up. Unless you want to start your careers as genin in debt, of course. Naruto squawked in protest, and Sakura looked like she was giving serious consideration to shouting at Kakashi again. Oh, and I will say, you should probably do it as fast as you can. They might actually have to pay Chunin to dismantle those traps you put up. We'll have to do it again for training sometime, it'll be a good experience for you. Ah. We get it, we get it. Without giving us a chance to move, Naruto grabbed both Sakura's arm and mine, dragging us behind as he started running for the nearest still-armed trap. The last thing I remembered before it started to fade away to warm sunlight was Sakura yelling at Naruto for triggering a burst of shuriken too close to her face. I stared in disbelief as Naruto wrestled with a large cat that was trying to escape from his grasp. I repeat. Are you sure this is the target, Tora? Kakashi's voice filtered into my ear. I internally crushed the desire to swear as a mix of thoughts and memory metaphorically smashed into the back of my head, all around the efforts we had gone to towards catching this cat. We. Yes, I finally answered through a clenched jaw, speaking into the headset. What the fuck? Well, I was becoming resigned to these dreams, suddenly knowing what I had been up to, and even thinking right before this was I resisted the urge to shudder. I wasn't sure why, considering that Naruto was busy struggling with the still writhing cat and Sakura was trying to help without getting scratched herself. They probably wouldn't have noticed. Good. The lost pet Tora search mission is complete, Kakashi responded. The headset crackled slightly. I'll meet you at the rendezvous point. Back to the mission desk, he meant. A small part of me hated that I knew that. I looked over at the ongoing struggle between Jinchuriki and Housecat before I stepped over closer. Here, let me take the cat and then take your jacket off so we can wrap Tora up in it, I told Naruto. Both the cat and Naruto stopped for a moment to stare at me in surprise before the cat started fighting against Naruto even more, yowling. Ah. I reached in as quickly as I could, yanking the cat out of Naruto's arms and squashed Tora against my chest, doing my best to prevent the upset animal from pushing its legs out to try to shred me in turn. It really was a desperate cat, which made sense, considering what awaited it. Naruto. Your jacket. Naruto had already sat back up and was fighting with the zipper pull. Somehow, cat fur had managed to get stuck along the zip in the earlier struggle. I'm hurrying, he said. Not too long after, he managed to force it open and he flung the jacket off, one sleeve turned inside out in the rush. Sakura, hold the jacket out, I gritted. Tora managed to force a paw out and reached out to claw at my face. I pushed the cat away just in time to avoid it and in the direction of the now waiting jacket. After a short moment of flailing, we had the cat firmly and tightly swaddled in Naruto's jacket, only with the head popped out. Tora gave all of us a narrow-eyed expression of feline displeasure. Wow, I can't believe that worked. Naruto grinned and wiped his face with the back of his hand, but not before I realized that there were a few droplets of welling blood mixed with the glisten of sweat. His face, on the other hand, showed no signs of scratching. Huh. It was also a bit weird to see him without the jacket. Underneath, he was wearing a blue t-shirt with his usual spiral, embossed in white in the front. I'd hope it worked, I muttered. That was so smart, Sasuke, Sakura said, fluttering her eyes at me. She looked a bit bedraggled from her own earlier attempt at grabbing Tora before we had finally given up on separate approaches. I couldn't believe this one cat had taken so much effort, but it made sense if Tora was regularly trying to escape from Madame Shijimi. The daimyo had shinobi as well, after all, and it wouldn't have surprised me if some of them had ended up dragged into attempting to capture the cat at some point or another, slowly pushing Tora into developing enough evasion skills that the cat would rarely be able to be captured by anything but ninja. It was just Tora's luck to try and mount an escape in the middle of Konoha instead of the capital or any of the daimyo's homes. I didn't like the fact that some of those thoughts had floated into my head like they were facts. Not really, was the only answer I gave Sakura. Now we can get Tora back and get a better mission. Naruto pumped his fist. No more of these stupid D-ranks. Sakura looked dubious while she picked up our balled-up cat captive. Do you really think we'd get something better so soon? Tora yowled piteously. Are you kidding? Kakashi-sensei's been murdering us with training. We're so far beyond this. He declared. He started to walk, hands behind his head. I wouldn't bet on that, I said with a shrug as Sakura and I joined him. It still took us time to find a cat. One that had been inspired by unworldly forces, considering how long it took us to find her, but I didn't want to think about that or the fact I even remembered that. Was remembering things from inside a dream from before dreams started even a thing? How the hell would you even look something like that up? The walk from this forested section within the walls to the administrative center that shared the academy's building didn't help my mood any. Sakura and Naruto's chatter tried to pull me into their separate tracks of conversation a few times, but I ignored them. Instead, I only found myself taking everything around me in. It was with an unpleasant start I realized that even with the rarer aspects where the anime manga would pan or give focus to Konoha, it wasn't really comparable to this as we walked down a main thoroughfare. Storefronts on the ground floor took the attention of most of the foot traffic, with the windows of the floors above providing hints to the people who lived inside. My head was just filling way too much in for it to be just the show. Was I going nuts? Retreating more and more into an imaginary mindscape in my dreams? Even the size of the building more of a grouped complex, with multiple added sections of slightly different styles and age that housed the academy, and what was the shinobi side of the village's administrative system was large, I realized. Much larger than it would need to be if it was just a single class of genin graduating every year. Kakashi was waiting up ahead for us, just in front of the doors. He had his book out. Even from this far away, we could see the occasional civilian filter in or out, giving him a wide berth as soon as they realized what he was reading. I pulled off the headset and clicked it off as we reached him, scowling as I realized that I had known how to do even that unconsciously. He tilted his head slightly as he took in the wrapped-up cat in Sakura's arms. A bit unorthodox, but I can't say I'm surprised. He held his empty hand out. Headsets, please. They took my name down for checking those out, and I'd rather not have to fill out more paperwork than I have to. There was a thoughtful pause. Of course, I could teach you three to do the paperwork. Sakura gave him a disgusted look. You're the one who's supposed to do all of that. You aren't shoving your work onto us more than you already do. Ah, but it's not my fault the trap course you three came up with is so effective, is it? It's much better than anything I could have come up with, he rejoined. I somehow doubted that, and I dropped my headset into his hand before taking the balled-up cat from Sakura so she could remove hers. Tora seemed to realize deliverance was soon upon her and was at this point yowling loudly. Naruto eagerly pulled his off, dropping it into Kakashi's palm in a way that resulted in the wires getting wrapped around the rest. Kakashi's visible eye momentarily squinted into a wince. He deserved it. Maybe not whatever Chunin was inevitably in charge of the communications equipment Kakashi was going to return, but still. I stuffed my fingers down past the gap we had left for Tora's head and grabbed at what scruff on her neck I could before adjusting my hold to turn the rest of the cat around. You should probably take the jacket off before we get accused of mistreating the daimyo's wife's cat, I grumbled. Naruto eyed the cat and began to delicately untie the sleeves. Tora screamed. I was really beginning to dislike this cat. One jacket removal later, we finally entered and headed for the mission area where we were immediately swarmed by Madame Shijimi herself, who immediately snatched the cat from my hands. Oh. Tora-chan. My cute little Tora-chan. She was completely ignoring the cat's increasingly desperate yowls and attempts to escape as she smashed her face against the cat's. I didn't quite feel guilty enough about returning the cat as I probably should have. Once the mission completion was finalized and Madame Shijimi paid the Chunin clerk, we watched as she shoved Tora into the cat carrier she brought with her. Thank you so much for the job your lovely genin did, Hiruzen-san. She called over to the Hokage before she left. Tell your son hello for me. Well, at least we weren't the only ones who got to have some residual embarrassment from that whole mission. Even Iruka, who was helping with the clerical duties, looked awkward at having to witness that one-sided exchange. Was he off from the academy for a while since his class had just graduated, or was this just a part of some regular additional duties for him? Anyways, the Sanday managed to feign a cough around his pipe when we walked over. The next missions on offer that your team is eligible for are. He lifted a scroll, which was marked with a D at the top. Existing in the context of being a Japanese series, that part made sense, but within the world itself, trying to think on it just gave me a headache. An elder's grandson requires babysitters, leaving the question of exactly what sort of hellchild required 3 genin to watch it. Shopping in one of the outlying villages boring, but possibly not too bad, but could also be just as painful. Or to help with potato digging. To plant potatoes or to harvest potatoes. That one was clearly just manual labor. No. No more D ranks. Naruto protested. I want to do something actually cool for once. Find us a better one. Kakashi audibly sighed and Sakura looked annoyed. Iruka stood up and slammed his palms on the desk. You're just genin. He shouted. Everyone starts off with simple duties and missions. You're supposed to work your way up from D ranks. Naruto looked ready to burst. I figured now was as good a time to ask as any. How does that work for you since you're an academy teacher? I don't. Iruka blinked as he realized he had started to go off on the wrong genin, expecting Naruto to respond instead. It's my off cycle. He tried to answer. We aren't immediately given a new class after our old one graduates, outside of extenuating circumstances. I wouldn't be a very good teacher if I didn't have a chance to do some work outside of the academy to refresh my skills, Iruka explained. We all do some clerical work, missions, and rotate through a few different departments for a few months before we take on a new class. The Hokage nodded in approval at Iruka's explanation. Which is why D ranks have the variety they do. They're still crappy missions, Naruto grumbled, though my question and Iruka's answer had partially satiated his complaints. They're supposed to give you time to develop your skills before moving on to more difficult missions. Iruka swatted Naruto's head with the B rank scroll. What do you think we're doing every day? Naruto shouted, covering his head. We go and train and risk getting caught on fire and hit with kunai because Kakashi-sensei decided our stupid obstacle course was a great idea and then we have to go and catch cats and weed plants and shop for old grannies. Iruka's attention switched to Kakashi. Fire jutsu already? And you're throwing kunai at them, they just graduated. Iruka actually looked like he was seriously considering a throwdown against Kakashi. Technically they're throwing the kunai at themselves, since it's all trap-based, Kakashi answered, lazily. They came up with it, I just thought it was a good idea to keep up. Besides, they have an Uchiha on their team, they have to get used to a little bit of friendly fire. I didn't know how I felt about that, besides mildly insulted, which I was also somewhat uncomfortable with being. The Hokage pulled his pipe away for a moment. Recently graduated genin received D rank missions. That's the policy. Yeah? Well, maybe it's a dumb policy. Naruto insisted. We can do better. Give us the chance to prove it. You might think I'm still the same troublemaking brat I was before, but I'm not. I'm a ninja now, and so are Sasuke and Sakura. Fine. The Hokage returned his pipe to his mouth and gave it a strong puff, sending an O-ring of smoke into the air. I'll give you a C rank. While I was expecting this, Kakashi didn't seem to be. He actually slumped over. It's a protective detail. Hirizen's eyes glanced down at the scroll of C lists. I already knew which one it was, but apparently it was distinct enough that Iruka began to go through the paperwork on the desk in front of him without needing further details. Really? Naruto jumped in excitement. Who? I bet it's someone cool, or oh. Is it a princess? The Hokage snorted. Calm down. Naruto looked somewhat deflated, but to my surprise didn't argue back, if only likely, because it'd defeat the point he just made. Let him in, the Hokage said, not anyone in particular that I could tell. The door on the other side of the room opened and the gray-haired bridge builder entered, already taking a performative chug from the bottle he had. My interest was piqued more by the fact that before the door closed behind him, I was able to see that it was some kind of waiting room. It made sense to have some kind of waiting area. They're really saddling me with a bunch of brats. Tazuna announced, louder than necessary. I wondered if he was actually drunk or just playing it up. If it was the second, he was doing a good job of it and none of the experienced ninja nearby were giving any hint on their faces that they suspected it was otherwise. And what's with the short one with the stupid face? Are these kids even ninja? Naruto, interestingly enough, made a face immediately. What? I'm not short and I'm not stupid. Apparently not, since something had changed enough for him to realize he was the one being insulted. I just haven't got my growth spurt in yet. Sakura and I ended up exchanging a look over the blonde's head. Kakashi clamped his hand down on Naruto's neck, warningly. I'm the master bridge builder Tazuna, he said, taking another swig. I expect you to guard me with your lives until I return to Wave and complete the bridge I'm working on, even though you're all brats. I half expected Naruto's temper to flare up this time, but instead after grinding his teeth together he met Tazuna's eyes. Yeah, well, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and if you think you're gonna get to me like that, you're wrong. We're gonna do our job, even if it kills us. It's a C rank, Kakashi reminded him, dragging Naruto back. No one's dying here, he said, boredly. My name is Hada Kakashi, Tazuna-san, and these are my students. We will meet you at the gate in an hour. Tazuna seemed satisfied enough by Kakashi's introduction and gave a brusque nod before he left the building. What a jerk, Sakura said under her breath. The Jounin gave a half-lidded look at the Hokage and Iruka. Mission details. Iruka already had the full paperwork in hand. Tazuna-san requested capable ninja for bodyguarding for his return to Wave and for the time it takes to finish a bridge he is working on. Listed concerns are robbers and highwaymen. Robbers and highwaymen, Kakashi repeated under his breath. It will do. He turned his attention to us again, letting go of Naruto and giving him a slight shove towards me. Standard loadout for a week, he told us. I'm not checking your bags, use your own discretion. I'll meet you at the gate. Kakashi eyed the Hokage speculatively and before the elderly shinobi could even say anything, darted over to one of the windows, opened it and bolted out. The Hokage sighed and looked at us. Don't pick up his habits. I'd rather die first, Sakura told him. He didn't seem to know how to take that response. Naruto pumped his fist, doing a little stamping dance where he stood. Yes. He stopped, stood as straight as he could and tossed a sloppy two-fingered salute towards Iruka. Just watch, Iruka-sensei. We're gonna come back from this one experienced and then you'll just have to give us more C ranks. I'm gonna outrank you in no time. Iruka laughed, sounding amused. We'll see about that, he told Naruto, good-naturedly. Just make sure you pay attention and come back safely. Yeah. Without any warning, Naruto dragged Sakura and I towards the door out, only stopping in the middle of opening it to turn towards the Hokage and shout, that head is gonna be mine soon, old man. Believe it. Even from this distance, I could see the Hokage's eyes roll before the door closed behind us. Sakura heaved a sigh as she shoved Naruto's arm off her before she started walking. Since we're supposed to meet the client there in an hour, we're going to just have enough time to pack, she said. I hope my mom is home. I don't want to just leave a note before we go. Sakura looked thoughtful. She started to think out loud. If we're packing for a week and we're heading to Wave Ugh, I'm going to need a couple changes of clothes. I don't even know how many kunai I should bring. Naruto scuffed the side of his sandal self-consciously at Sakura's comment. You think Kaka-sensei is actually gonna show up on time? He asked. I mean, it's not like he's shown up on time for anything as it is. He can get away with being late with us, I said, finally speaking up as we walked down the main street leading away from the building. And with D ranks, since Genin can do those alone. After the first few, he had actually started to only show up roughly half the time we were supposed to meet for a D rank. Again, creeping horror edged up the back of my neck at the fact that knowledge and the annoyance that came with it had just come into being like that. I doubt he'd pull it with a client that's going to take us out of the village, much less into a different country. I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice. Sasuke's right, Sakura added. Make sure you're actually packed properly this time, Naruto. She eyed him. If we do this fast enough, we can at least double-check each other's gear. Meet at my house. Yeah. I silently nodded. Despite my conflicting feelings and thoughts, as we split off in different directions, I found myself briskly walking, mostly on main streets and through the occasional side path, heading home until I reached a sizable apartment building. It wasn't too far away from the academy and also was on the same side of the village as the Uchiha compound was. Roughly halfway between both locations, I realized. Deliberate. It only soured my mood further, especially when I came to the door that I realized was supposed to be into my apartment and immediately unlocked it without hesitating. Not mine. Sasuke's apartment. I closed the door behind me and pulled the sandals off. Inside, it had a sort of organized neatness to it I wouldn't have expected from most kids this age, much less a boy. It was actually in less disarray than my own apartment was at this point in the semester. And yet it was probably because of the sparse, almost empty feeling to it. This was not a very lived-in apartment, even for being a one-room style studio. The desk near the bed was nearly bare, with only an organizer tray of pens and pencils, a single notebook, and sharpening tools. An Uchiwa in the clan colors was on the wall above the bed. I inhaled, fell face forward onto the bed, and screamed into the mattress. Sometimes, letting it all out was supposed to help was my counselor's advice. In this case, it did not make me feel any better that I was apparently losing my damn mind. For dreams. I finally rolled over and stared blankly at the ceiling before I sat up. I could just give up and wait until I woke up, but everything about the past dreams just told me that would be an interminable, potentially dreadfully long wait, and I had no idea how long this one would last. I hated this. I walked into the bathroom, slipping feet into the slippers at its door and looked at the mirror. I had no idea what I was expecting. The features of Sasuke's face looked back at me. Pale skin, dark eyes, dark hair that was thick yet feathery enough that only the bangs at the front had enough length and weight to them to naturally stay down. Puberty had not yet widened the jaw of the face I saw reflecting back at me. I ran fingers across the engraved leaf symbol on the hit I ate. It felt cold. No, I said out loud. It was still the young undeveloped voice of a preteen boy. Even alone, I was still Sasuke. I inhaled and stepped back away from the mirror before I punched it. It wouldn't do me any good. I left the bathroom and its slippers behind. Why the fuck did it have to be Sasuke? I breathed out. All I had to do was just go along with things until I woke up for however long. And maybe stop sleeping entirely. Or at least partially. I might not be able to pull 74 hours awake for papers or just because I could like I did back in high school and my first years in college, but a little bit of sleep deprivation couldn't backfire that badly. Going along with things still meant I had to pack. Standard loadout. I walked over to where the gear bag was sitting on the floor by the window and opened it up to take a look. It was filled the same as from Kakashi's test, but the kunai and shuriken within had seen much better days. The trap-based obstacle course must have really been doing a number on everything. Some looked overly dulled from abuse, and there was even a surprising quantity that had that particular reflective quality of metal unevenly heated, some of which had scorch and soot marks. Most looked like they were probably in good enough condition to take, but there were enough that would need to be sorted out. Instead, I turned the bag out and dumped all of its contents on the floor and went searching. If I used weapons that had a high turnover rate enough to warrant regular replacement, where would I store extras in here? I found Sasuke's weapon stash the first place I looked, in a drawer under the bed. As useful as that was, I wasn't very happy that my first instinct was right. I pulled out a few still tied together braces of kunai and shuriken, setting them on the top of the bed before I closed the drawer. In less time than I had expected it to take, I ended up having everything laid out on the bed, ready for packing. A few changes of clothes, a medical kit I had found inside the closet that was far beyond what I would consider for normal first aid, weapons, and an ultra-lightweight kit for camping. A short look through the tiny kitchen found rations, which I also had thrown into the mix. Nothing seemed off to me, so I quickly went through what I had dumped earlier, separating out what was too dulled from abuse and would need time to be sharpened, and any shuriken that had been bent or warped enough to ruin their shape. Some of those I slotted right into the leg holster rather than put with the rest. Packing after that was, disturbingly, almost automatic. Practiced, and I wasn't consciously making choices as I put everything in. I eyed the filled pack with discomfort before I closed it up. I wondered what it said about me, that I was giving into the details even with everything. I pulled the bag up onto my shoulders. As I walked towards the door to the outside, I paused as I passed by the bathroom, staring at the mirror again. The face might not have been mine, but the sour expression was. I left the apartment in a sulk, letting my Sasuke's legs take me to Sakura's, hands jammed into my pockets. It was a slightly different route and I would have preferred being on my lonesome, but it seemed that wasn't going to happen because I heard excited shouting behind me. Hey. Hey. Sasuke. Naruto's voice called to me. I stopped and turned. The blonde boy hurried to join me. His bag looked overstuffed and he had barely managed to close it shut. Isn't this great? A C rank. And we're leaving the village. I smiled wanly. Right. He was so excited that he barely seemed to notice. We're going to show everyone. Do you think Sakura's finished packing? I bet she is, but then again she's got to make everything perfect, but I tuned him out as it turned into only rambling. Eventually we came onto the residential street that the Haruno family lived on. Sakura was leaning against an outside wall, her bag not in sight. There you are. She said when she spotted us. Without warning, she stepped forward, grabbing me and Naruto by the wrists, pulling us towards her front door and inside from there. "Ah-chan, Naruto and Sasuke are here," she called before removing her sandals and stepping away from the Jenkin. Sakura's house was cheerily lit inside with a lived-in atmosphere. From where we were, we could see into the kitchen where Sakura's mother was, washing dishes. She stopped and looked at us for a moment. While she looked cheerful, her gaze seemed to pause on Naruto, almost cautious, before she finally said anything. I could feel Naruto freeze up next to me and saw him pause with one hand in the middle of taking off a sandal. "So you're her teammates," she said, putting on a smile. "Sakura said so much about you both." She brought up a sudsy hand up to her face. "It's nice to meet you," I said, slowly. I glanced at Naruto, whose earlier cheer seemed to have melted away. While Sakura's mother wasn't treating him with disdain or cruelty, that moment of caution still probably stung. I elbowed him. Yeah," Naruto said, not quite steeling himself. His usual confidence and boisterous had left him, leaving just a lonely orphan. "It's nice to meet you too. Sakura's a great teammate. We're going to go check our gear before we leave," Sakura announced. She put her hands on her hips and looked at us. "I have everything in my room. If you've forgotten anything, I might be able to lend you something, but you better give it back." She walked towards the stairs, turning slightly to beckon us over. Naruto darted immediately to follow, sticking close to her, and I trailed behind. It was just enough of a delay that I heard Sakura's mother let out a small sigh as we went up the stairs. Her own caution over Naruto being inside her home seemed to have had an impact on her as well. It wasn't until I was at the top of the stairs that she called out, "Leave your door open." "Yes, Ka-chan." Sakura called back, resigned, before she opened her door. Sakura's room, while small, was the essence of preteen girl, between the light colors, plethora of mementos, and the soft stuffed animals that rested respectfully at the top of the bed. Her own bag sat on top of the bed, flap open. She had only half packed it to make it easier for double-checking. "We'll switch and double-check," Sakura said, deciding without letting us have any input. "I'll check Naruto's, and you can check mine, Sasuke." She barely turned it into a question, rather than a demand. She had been so close to her forgetting her crush. "And you'll check Sasuke's bag, Naruto." I shrugged and set my bag down where I was. "Sounds good to me," Naruto said. His voice was absent its usual cheer, but he was attempting to be louder to make up for it. He stepped back before he set his bag down, so there would be slightly more room for everyone. We walked past each other, and Sakura slipped over towards Naruto's bag, giving it a sidelong look before she opened it. To be more precise, she at least attempted to open it. When she let loose the straps, the flap burst open on its own, everything inside no longer restrained. "Naruto, what's with all of this?" His bag was, if anything, overpacked besides a few shirts balled up that were the only evidence of any clothing. He had gone overboard on weapons, the giant folded Fuma shuriken catching my eye the most. I remembered with a sudden start that those had shown up in the story for this mission. Naruto had some, but so did Sasuke, didn't he? And I hadn't packed any. "I want us to be prepared," Naruto insisted. "You heard Kakashi-sensei. It's a C rank. We might not even have to fight." Sakura tried to argue. She yanked one of the folded blades out, holding it up. "What are you even going to do with this? Throw it at people?" Sakura's eyes narrowed at him, and she lightly tossed it at him, casually aiming for his head. Naruto squawked, but still caught it, setting it down when he dropped into sitting cross-legged on the floor. Naruto began rooting through what I had packed. When he came across the medical kit, he squinted at it, holding it up. Isn't this a bit much to bring with us?" he said, as though he hadn't just been accused of going overkill himself. "You don't think we'll get hurt that badly, do you? Because this is one of those really fancy expensive ones and I want us to be prepared," I said dryly, before he could keep on rambling. An idle look through of Sakura's things showed that again, she probably wasn't straying from whatever standard meant in this case. Rations, gear for camping outside, tidily packed weapons, and just enough clothes. Exact and precisely packed and balanced. He made a face at me. "Ugh, boy," Sakura grumbled under her breath. She was only looking more frustrated at Naruto's bag. "Naruto, how are you planning on even carrying all of this if your bag won't even close properly? And instant ramen isn't a ration. Didn't Iruka-sensei dock you for this once?" "Sure, it is. And he isn't our sensei anymore, and this isn't for a grade. It's fine. We can redistribute things around," I said, before he could argue back. "It'll save us time and that way we don't have to leave anything behind." I looked at Naruto. "Except the ramen. That's not going to be enough unless you want to feel like you're starving half the time. Unless you plan on hunting for food on the way there and back." Naruto hung his head. "Fine." Sakura pulled out a full stack of instant ramen styrofoam cups somewhat dented from how they had been packed and set them on her desk and then replaced them with ration bars. The bag looked less likely to burst it seems now, at least, but still overfull. "How did you even manage to fill it up this much?" she wondered. "Practice. Ask me some of what he has and I'll put it in your bag," I said. "You still have room to spare." Sakura nodded. It didn't take long until Naruto's bag was less offensive to Sakura's sense of what was right and orderly, and her own actually looked more filled. "Hey Sasuke. Do you mind if I put this in your stuff?" Naruto held up the folded Fuma shuriken Sakura had tossed at him earlier. "Go for it," I said. I didn't actually care that much. Naruto's method of packing only left questions. Sakura's neat and organized approach hadn't actually managed to pare down on the worst of the bulk in his, and how I had packed shouldn't have left enough room for something that large. Naruto still managed to slip it in with everything else. "If I ask you how you even managed to do that, it's going to be the same answer as before, isn't it?" Sakura asked. Naruto beamed. She sighed before clasping her hands together. "I think that's it." Sakura asked, looking around, double-checking everything. "If we leave now, we won't have to worry about being late." "Sounds fine by me." "Yeah." Grabbing our things and heading back down the steps, Naruto followed me to the door. Sakura went over to her mother, who embraced her in a strong hug. "Look at you. Already leaving on longer missions. It feels just like yesterday you and Ino were still playing with dolls. Soon you're going to be old enough to leave home." Sakura looked self-conscious, even as she hugged back. "Ah-chan, that won't be for ages," Sakura said when she stepped away, trying to be consoling. "I'll see you and 2chan when I get back first thing. Please take care of my daughter," her mother said, actually directly looking at Naruto and me. She seemed to have resolved her earlier Naruto-related feelings, at least. "I'm sure your sensei is showing you everything you need to know." "Well. Sakura is skilled enough to look out after herself, too, I answered, in the middle of putting my sandals back on. Sakura flushed pink. Yeah. Naruto seemed less out of his element, with Sakura being the topic. She's great and real smart. Oh, I see how it is, Sakura's mother said, looking amused. Is this the boy? Sakura's blushing turned into a completely red face. She ran for the Jinkin, shoving the door open with a smooth action as she quickly picked up her own footwear and hooked her arms around ours with unexpected agility. Bye Ka-chan, love you, tell 2-chan I love him too, we're going to be late, bye. With that, she dragged us out of the house, letting the door close behind her. Whatever else her mother had to say would be a mystery. She sighed in relief. Hey, what was that about? Naruto asked, looking confused. He still had one sandal in one of his hands. I know, Sasuke's were at least on. Nothing, Sakura insisted, still red in the face. Nothing. The blonde puffed his cheeks out. Fine, he answered. But next time give us a warning. HMPH. She looked away as she pulled her own sandals on. I sighed. Let's just get going. From here, the gate wasn't that far away at all. I ended up looking at all the buildings and everything properly this time as we walked in that direction. Though the show and series had always only shown bits and pieces of the village, it had generally been enough to show that it was fairly built up and its architecture unique compared to real cities, with the rounded-off buildings, presence of ledges and walkways everywhere, densely packed. I had it apparently added that up to realize it made the place a maze if you weren't familiar with its streets. Well, there were straight thoroughfares, not all of them were. Mixed with the blocks of buildings were pockets of dense woods, and some buildings had unobtrusive entrances on second or even third floors. In some areas, I wouldn't be surprised if the residents there would ever even need to come down to the ground-level streets. The ninjas certainly didn't, but this was all built with them in mind. Everything about Konoha that I was seeing, at least, would be a freerunner or Parker artist's extremely nerdy dream. Then again, this was my apparently extremely nerdy dream that my unconscious mind had stuck its tenterhooks into and was refusing to let go of. Soon enough we crossed onto the main street that ran from the gate area and we were able to see Tazuna. He was being boisterously drunk at one of the gate guards on duty. The guard was sitting at a table near a building right at the inside of the gate, inspecting a small booklet in his hand, which he was looking through while ignoring whatever Tazuna was saying. After a while, he came to a page and popped a metal cylinder out from one of his flak jacket pockets and turned around to look at the inside, calling in to whoever was in there. Another bored-looking guard exited with a metal block in hand and what looked like a closed compact. The first one set the booklet on the table as his compatriot opened the compact showing a bright red interior and pressed the block against it before pressing it onto the page. Even here, we could see the red symbol left on the paper. It was a stamp, then. Or a seal. The first ninja pressed his own into the ink as well before superimposing his on top and the second went back into the building. Huh. I wonder what that's about. Naruto asked. Foreigners who don't live within the village have to present a passport with their credentials and be checked in and out of the village, Kakashi's voice answered, coming out of nowhere. Ah. Where'd you come from? Naruto startled, twisting around before he finally saw the Jounin. He wasn't the only one. That's a long story, Kakashi said, deadpan. His backpack was slung over his shoulders and was probably the only thing keeping him from being in a complete slouch. Naruto stared at him. That's not what I meant. Couldn't they just get a second passport or something? They could, but it'd be difficult, Kakashi answered lazily. Each country's capital handles them for civilians. As a system it's not just useful for us, but for the various daimyo's governments as well. What about for us? Sakura asked. Kakashi patronizingly patted her head and she visibly bristled under his hand. You won't have to worry about that unless you're going to another hidden village and that won't be happening anytime soon. There you are. Tazuna had finally noticed us. He slipped the booklet into a side pocket of his own pack and walked over towards us, bottle still in hand. Here we are, Kakashi echoed. I wondered if he was going to end up being bored enough to pull his book out. Let's go. Naruto shouted enthusiastically. His momentary insecurities from earlier seemed to have vanished just by being near the gate. Sakura gave him a quizzical look. Are you really that excited for this mission? Naruto laughed self-consciously, but it didn't remove his eager expression. I've never left the village before. This will be the first time. As if to underline this, he consciously stepped forward, stopping right at the demarcation line where the gates would close, and then stepped past that until he was clear of the wall's border entirely. He pumped his fist. We could have picked any kind of deer rank for that, Sakura said quietly under her breath, staring at him in disbelief. Azuna gazed doubtfully at Naruto before giving Kakashi a derisive look. Am I really going to be safe with this brat? I'm a jounin, you'll be fine. Kakashi flapped one of his hands as though physically dismissing the older man's concerns. Naruto glared but, surprising me yet again, didn't burst into a full onset of temper. Yeah, well, one day I'm going to become Hokage. And you'll remember saying all of this and doubting me, and you're gonna have to acknowledge me. Believe it. Izuna scoffed. Even if you did, I wouldn't. Naruto made a face, but only grumbled under his breath. After that, we walked, mostly in silence, except for the occasional sound of birds and the rustling of wildlife in the trees beyond the road, rotating who took the lead. Occasionally Naruto would aim a squinting look at the back of Tizuna's head, which would result in Kakashi quietly grinding Naruto's hair into his head. After the third or so time, he stomped off to take point from Sakura. Sakura gave Tizuna a considering look. Tizuna-san, you're from Wave, aren't you? And? He took a swig from his bottle, giving her a challenging look. Sakura turned her attention reluctantly to Kakashi instead. Kakashi-sensei, does Wave have ninja too? I know they don't have a hidden village, but he shook his head. No, they don't. Most other countries do. You said the Konoha checks foreigners' passports earlier, right? She waited for acknowledgement from him before she continued on. Do we get that many people who come from other countries? Kakashi nodded, blasé. Mission prices, distance, and reputation play a role in which hidden villages or even unaffiliated ninja clans clients will hire, he said, starting a bored explanation. Konoha's reputation and prices mean we get plenty of clients who will travel into fire, even if they have a hidden village or ninja clans nearer who might be more convenient. This had taken an unexpected turn. Naruto twisted back to look. Wouldn't it be easier to go to whoever's closest? He asked, confused. Sometimes, but economic factors play a role, especially for merchants. Kakashi shrugged. The various daimyo usually feel obligated to hire shinobi who live within their country's borders, but they're generally the exception, not the rule. What do you mean by economic factors? The things that impact how people buy and sell things, Kakashi explained. All businesses need to make a certain amount of money in the long term to survive, because the people who run them need to be able to eat and have somewhere to sleep too. Oh. Like how Ichiraku's costs more than instant ramen, cause they have to make it there and pay for everything. Sure, Kakashi said, like that. I felt like I could almost hear a piece of his already shriveled soul crack off at the comparison. How things are priced are more complicated than that, but basically. Let's use the hidden village system as an example. Because Konoha is as large as it is, we can afford to send more ninja on missions and charge less than other villages. While we aren't charging as much as we could, the amount of clients we get in return make up for it. Naruto squinted, clearly thinking. If we're getting all these missions, doesn't that make other people angry at us? That's why alliances are important, Kakashi said. Besides for other things. When war happens, trade slows down or sometimes stops entirely, but with an alliance or at least neutrality, it means we can usually guarantee some safety within those shared borders. Otherwise, merchants will decide it's too risky to take goods to and from our villages entirely. So if we drop our prices too low and end up taking another village's missions from civilians to the point where they get desperate, they could get angry at us for being successful. But if we don't take enough missions, it's bad for us too, and if we end up at war the civilians stop hiring anyone and the merchants stop selling things. Sakura looked confused. To be fair to her, this wasn't exactly basic material. It wasn't like it was something most people really knew, even as adults. I had ended up working in financing in my last job before returning to school, and even most of the people I worked with barely understood it. How does that help anyone? It doesn't, Tizuna said severely, cutting in. Trade is important for everyone, not just ninja. The bridge I'm working on will connect Wave to Fire and be important for my whole country. Was Kakashi's only response to that, giving the older man a lazy look. I thought water was known for its ships and sailors, being an island nation. Izuna, rather than answer, brought his bottle to his lips again and took a strong drink instead. Evading Kakashi's probing comment was probably the only thing he could do. But the conversation lapsed into silence again, with Sakura and Naruto, mostly Sakura, from what I could tell, still trying to untangle Kakashi's explanation from earlier. We walked past a puddle. This part was impossible to forget from rewatches, and both because of it and despite myself, I found my fingers reaching for the holster on my thigh. Kakashi was still in his half-slouch, though he had looked at it and the other three hadn't paid it any attention. The only real warning was the sound of something suddenly moving through the air before chains wrapped around Kakashi, before everyone sounded off in surprise at that and the two ninja who had appeared. Even though I was finding myself concerned at the fact that all of this was becoming increasingly detailed, it was still a dream, and I wasn't sure how I felt about how gory it looked when the two ripped Kakashi apart with their chains, besides queasy. I could have done without my brain deciding to make it look so graphic and realistic. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura screamed and the demon brothers landed behind Naruto. My mind blanked on what was supposed to come next. Sasuke had stepped in, but Naruto had originally frozen up, hadn't he? Irrationally, a streak of preemptive guilt ran through me at the idea of accidentally letting the main series character get killed off, even though I was sure the dreams were just me losing my sense of reality. Their chains shot out in Naruto's direction. I lunged forward in a leap, half aware that at some point I had ended up with a kunai and shuriken in my offhand. Naruto moved, twisting around in a hard skid that sent dust from the road into the air, kunai in both of his hands. I felt like I was separated from everything as I threw the shuriken, watching it hit the middle of a link and drive into one of the trunks of the trees, followed by the kunai driving it further in. The moment ended as soon as it had begun, and I was left very aware that I was now very precariously standing with one foot on each brother's head. I wound up grabbing onto their gauntlets by sheer chance, which unbalanced the two. Naruto dove forward, running and then sliding below, slashing at the closest leg on each side. Unfortunately for him, they released the chain and burst free in unison. One of them struck out at Naruto, and he wasn't quite quick enough to block it, the metal claws striking his hand instead of his chest. They circled back towards Tazuna. Sakura dashed directly in front of the old man, holding the kunai out in a defensive posture. Before I could move, much less think of what to do next, Kakashi appeared in front of the two ninja. They ran right into the space he was now occupying and were thrown off by their own inertia as he used it against them to clothesline them. Surprise and relief flooded onto Naruto, Sakura, and Tazuna's faces. "Good job, everyone," Kakashi said, as though he was entirely unaware he had two ninja flailing over his arms like particularly ungainly cats. "I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner and you got hurt, Naruto." A shift of his arms and he smashed their heads together and they went still. It was different from what had happened in the show, and yet not. The shock didn't last for long. Sakura glared at the jounin. "You play dead." "Not right now, Sakura-chan," Kakashi said indulgently. He walked over to the closest tree, it was the one the chain was still connected to. "Priorities first. Their claws are poisoned. Naruto, don't move around too much. Stay still. We'll need to open the wound up and drain the poisoned blood." "Ah. Those were poisoned." Naruto looked down in alarm at the oozing cuts on his hand. "Azuna-san, we need to talk." Kakashi dropped them down by the tree before reaching over his back and pulling out a coil of rope from a side pocket which he started to loop around the tree. Soon, the two fended-off attackers were tied down. Looking over at him, Tazuna appeared visibly apprehensive. Kakashi nudged their legs apart with the actual toes of one foot, a clear downside to the toeless ninja sandals, to look at the injuries Naruto had dealt before deciding they could be left as is. "These are Chunin from Kurigakure," he finally said, speaking. Kakashi could have easily been talking about the weather from his tone. Ninja from Mist are known for their tenacity. He eyed Naruto, who had his mouth open to begin to say something. "They keep fighting no matter what," he clarified. One of them glared at him. "How did you know we were there?" "The rain puddle," Kakashi said. "Oh?" Sakura exclaimed. "Because it hasn't rained lately, there shouldn't have been a puddle, right?" "That's right," Kakashi told her. "Wait, if you knew, couldn't you have just stopped them?" Naruto asked. He looked at Kakashi and then at his bloody hand. "Not without confirming something," Kakashi answered cryptically. Sakura gave him an annoyed look. "Which is their actual target," Kakashi finally explained. "Whether they were after us as Leaf Ninja or our client." I looked in Tazuna's direction. He was looking far less anxious than I would have thought. Kakashi was going for a strong lead up, after all. "We didn't hear there were shinobi after you," Kakashi continued on, casually. "Your mission request explicitly states robbers and highwaymen. So, I and whoever was determining the mission rank would assume gangs, at the very worst, which are still C-rank mission items." It occurred to me that Kakashi was actually trying to teach with these explanations he was giving. Opposing shinobi being involved would not just make it a B rank, but dramatically increase the price. "We can't protect you properly when we don't have all of the information." The older man looked contrite but didn't say anything in response. The main difference was that he wasn't meeting Kakashi's visible eye anymore. "Sensei, are we going to head back to the village?" Sakura asked. She looked unsure of her question even as she asked it. "Naruto's going to need to see an Iryonin for his hand, won't he? We're already a few hours away from the village, won't it get worse?" Naruto's eyes widened and he stared at his injured hand, clamping his uninjured one around his wrist protectively. "I hope not. They won't cut it off or anything, would they? I just started my career as a ninja. I can't lose a whole hand." Losing a whole arm hadn't exactly slowed him or Sasuke down that much by the series end. From what I had heard, I had only seen clips of it when it finally ended. This wasn't even his dominant one. Kakashi gazed at the three of us. He actually looked like he was thinking for once. I suddenly remembered what I had packed. "Wait," I spoke up, finally. "I brought a medical kit." Kakashi directed his full attention on me. "Did you?" I nodded, pulling my pack off, setting it down on the ground in front of me. I opened it up, dug in, and offered Kakashi the medical kit. Kakashi, to my consternation, patted my head when he walked over and took it from me. "I'm not a dog," I told him. "Dogs, children," Kakashi said, vaguely, as he walked over to Naruto, opening the pack up and beginning to pull things out. "Sakura, Sasuke, come over here." Sakura exchanged a look with me, but we walked over. Naruto eyed Kakashi warily. It'll be an antidote or something like that, right?" the blonde asked. "You're still conscious, so we'll just drain it," Kakashi answered. "Sakura, here." He dropped a long rubber cord into her hand. "Tie this around Naruto's bicep, you should know how to do a tourniquet from the academy. It'll help prevent the poison from traveling any further and will limit blood loss." Without any warning, he dropped a sealed-off paper bag that was long and thin into my hands. It was light, but there was something in it. I opened it up out of curiosity. Inside was a scalpel. I guess that made sense, to have an actually sterile option instead inside of a kit. "And you'll make the incision, Sasuke." This was such a bad idea I was actually speechless. It took about a second for what Kakashi was saying to fully sink in for the others. "Wait, what?" Sakura and Naruto howled, not quite in unison. Sakura was already in the middle of tying the tourniquet off. "You're going to make them do it?" Naruto stared at Kakashi in horror. "I did say we, didn't I?" Kakashi asked rhetorically. "No way. Gimme that." Before I could say anything, Naruto had stolen the scalpel and had sliced across the top of his injured hand. Soon, blood welled out of it. "Naruto!" Sakura shouted in shock. "Well. I can't say that won't work, but you didn't need to make that big of a cut," Kakashi said awkwardly, as though only now realizing it probably wasn't the greatest idea in the world to tell two 12-year-olds to perform field surgery on another when it wasn't actually necessary at all. "I think I'll just take that from you before you have any other ideas." The paper cover still in my hand and the slightly bloody scalpel in Naruto's quickly disappeared into Kakashi's hand and then both were gone without a trace. Naruto looked down at his bleeding hand, then at Kakashi. "Wait. You mean I didn't have to do that?" "Not really, no," Kakashi told him. "We only needed a small hole to drain from. Not a long slice like that. Then again, it was a scalpel. They aren't really stabbing implements," he said thoughtfully. "That said, well, we do have to work with what we have, doing it with something sterile and sharp is the best option if there's no one with medic training. You could die from sepsis if you use your field weapons for something like this and they aren't treated, and that's not a pleasant way to go." I found myself feeling concerned for Kakashi, in spite of myself. That was a hell of a tangent. Naruto and Sakura were looking at him with something akin to horror. "If Sasuke hadn't brought that medical kit," Sakura started. "Oh, this was going to become ugly." I interrupted Sakura. I started slowly, looking at Kakashi, "You need to stop talking." Fine, Kakashi said dismissively, popping out a wrap of bandage from the kit as he kneeled, taking Naruto's hand and, somewhat questionably, tilted Naruto's hand to let the blood run off. "I'll just wrap this." Kakashi trailed off, staring at the cut. It was, slowly but surely, visibly joining back together in front of our eyes. "I'm going to be okay, right?" Naruto asked, not sure how to take Kakashi's reaction. I wasn't sure if it was because he was already used to healing this fast and wasn't aware it wasn't normal, or if he hadn't noticed at all with being preoccupied from Kakashi accidentally terrifying him. "Right. You'll be fine," Kakashi firmly said, and he quickly finished wrapping Naruto's hand up. He tossed the now slightly depleted kit back to me. Sakura was still glaring at the jounin. I wasn't sure she had even noticed Naruto's abnormally fast healing, considering how annoyed she was by Kakashi's conduct. Kakashi didn't seem to notice, but he met my eyes with his visible one before glancing back at Naruto's hand, meaningfully. I had no idea what he was trying to convey. Even dreaming, and I suddenly realized with a shock that for a while I had forgotten that entirely with a version of him in front of me, Kakashi was impossible to read. Was it supposed to be a warning about what I saw? To see if I had noticed? I shrugged back at him. He seemed to be satisfied, possibly even pleased by whatever the hell that exchange was supposed to be, and set his hands on mine and Naruto's heads to leverage back into a standing position. It was completely unnecessary, which probably was why he did it. "Ah. Hey." Naruto swatted at Kakashi's arms ineffectively. "You're really weird, you know that, sensei." "Am I?" I had no idea. Kakashi shrugged, back to deflecting everything again, but the sharpness that had shown when he took out the mist nin had returned. "Now do we continue on the mission or not?" he asked, looking at us intently. "We don't know what's ahead of us and it will likely become only more difficult from here. It won't reflect badly on you as ninja if we return to Konoha, especially with this being your first mission out of the village and one that's turned out to be far beyond the parameters we were informed of. We won't always get to go back though, will we?" Sakura asked. Her question was so simple but so serious, contrasting against the innocent expression she had focused on Kakashi. What little of his face was visible looked tangled in how to answer that. "No, you won't." Naruto huffed out a breath, visibly steeling himself. No way we're going back. You just said it yourself, we can't always cut and run. It might be okay this time, but it won't be later. I refuse to ever give up. I don't want to head back either, Sakura said decisively. All eyes fell on me. Well, Sasuke? Kakashi asked. This wasn't real, I reminded myself. We keep going. Well, it looks like we have a consensus. Kakashi looked over at Izuna. We're still accompanying you to Wave. The fact that my head had very suddenly stopped throbbing was what made me realize it was this bullshit again. The fact I was standing on a foggy shoreline with the rest of with Team 7 and Izuna was a distant second. I could vaguely make out that there was a smattering of buildings up past the beach. Out on the water there were small boats with nets cast out over their sides, barely visible, and there were some here on the sand, away from the tide. Some were ramshackle, others carefully taken care of, but all of them were on the old side, as far as I could tell. The overwhelming scent of fish fresh, slightly old, and rotten hung in the air. This was some sort of fishing village, then. I wasn't sure I was willing to miraculously not feel the hangover if this was the result. I wasn't even sure how that would work, anyways. The smell was nearly bad enough to make taking the hangover worth it entirely on its own. At least I wasn't the only one suffering from the odor. Sakura looked slightly green, and looking at Kakashi, I suspected he was actually breathing through his mouth instead, not that it was easy to tell. Naruto seemed entirely unaffected, which was a mild kind of horrifying on its own. Izuna didn't seem to have a problem with it, but Wave's status as an island nation probably played into that. Your friend will be taking us across today? Kakashi asked. Yesterday was too clear, but this is the right sort of weather, Izuna answered. For what? Getting lost. Naruto mimed looking around. I thought this sort of weather was supposed to be dangerous. You can't see anything. That's the point, Izuna said, staring at the blonde. Sakura gave Izuna a concerned look. Between Kakashi and now this, she was probably losing whatever faith she might have ever had in the belief adults were responsible. She'd probably be better off without it. Eventually, a small boat emerged from the low fog with only one figure visible in it. Izuna looked tense until it got closer and he was able to identify the man sitting at its rear, who waved at him. To my surprise, he was steering the boat towards the shore. At the absolute last moment, he cut the engine and tilted the propeller up out of the water before he hopped out and pushed the boat further out of the water. Sorry about the wait, the engine was acting up, he said to Izuna before giving us a look over. Under his Tsujigasa, his narrow face looked tired. These are the ninja you hired? He sounded a bit dubious, which made sense considering that Kakashi was the only obvious adult, the other two were 12, and my unconscious had decided that for this slow descent into insanity, it only made sense for me to also look like a 12-year-old. They're able to handle it, Izuna said, which was a far cry from what I remembered from the series at this point. If you say so. He scratched the back of his head and adjusted the hat. I'm Kaji, he said, introducing himself. He didn't seem to be in the mood for making this longer than it needed to be, since he immediately followed it up with, "Get in, and I'll launch." Sakura's eyebrows furrowed together for a moment at stepping into the water for good reason, given the occasional dead fish floating on the surf and onto the sand, but to my surprise, she was the first one to get into the boat, beating Kakashi. When he tried to pat her on the head in praise, she smacked his hand away. I joined them next, and Izuna followed after me. Naruto was still on the shore, giving the water an askance look. I suddenly realized that at no point had he ever stood on any of the beach that was wet from the waves coming in. Naruto, hurry up. Sakura shouted as she unslung her backpack. She looked at Kakashi. I thought the Uzumaki were originally from Whirlpool. Wasn't it an island? She turned her attention back on Naruto. Your ancestors lived on the ocean. Hurry up. Kakashi tried to disguise what was a painfully obvious wince as a smile. It seemed to have worked on Sakura because she didn't seem to catch it. Ah, yes, but you have to remember, Naruto was born in Konoha and is an orphan. Sakura didn't have any time for Kakashi's logic. She just glared at Naruto more. Just get in the boat already. Naruto looked horrified. But Sakura. Fish poop in that water. And there's a dead one right there. There was indeed a dead fish floating on the water very close to the boat. Was this really what he had been thinking the whole time? Haji sighed. Kakashi looked between the two genin, got out of the boat, walked over to where Naruto was standing, and, against all protests, tucked him into an underarm carry before depositing Naruto in the front and getting back into the boat. With a firm shove, the boat glided into deeper waters, and in a practiced move the man gracefully pulled himself over the side and on board, only the hem of his shorts damp from the water. He pushed off further with his oar before lowering the propeller again and starting the engine. You're in Uzumaki? I thought they were supposed to have red hair, Kaji commented once he settled into a comfortable position. Red hair? Naruto screwed his eyes upwards and tugged on a hank of hair as though he could actually get a look at it. You like to wear orange. "You'd look awful with red hair," I pointed out. I set my Sasuke's bag down next to me. "You'd look awful with red hair." He shot back. It didn't even make sense as far as retorts went, but I couldn't tell if that was due to the change in dynamics or because he was busy thinking about something else. "I wonder if one of my parents had red hair," Naruto actually said out loud while he dropped his backpack onto the deck. Something else, then. He and Sakura were too busy looking out at the mist-covered ocean to see the fleeting look of wished-for death cross what was visible of Kakashi's face. He let the moment pass, but eventually he must have recovered because he turned his attention back to the client. "Tazuna-san, you mentioned your bridge is supposed to help Wave get out from under Gato's power. How long do you think it will be until it's complete?" "If we can keep working on it without interruption, about a month, maybe a month and a half if the weather works against us," Tazuna answered. "Most of the span leading from fire is finished. It starts from that village we waited at." Sakura turned, looking surprised. "It was that close. We didn't even see it." "That's because of the fog," Kakashi said, trying to sound lazy. "Water might be known for having constant cover year-round, but Fire's eastern coast is heavily blanketed from late spring through the summer because of warm air drifting over the ocean. Starting it from our side wouldn't just help avoid the need to ship in resources, but would have ended up useful in evading Gato's attention until now. His company doesn't have any stakes in Fire yet." He fixed his eye on Tazuna. "I avoided starting it on the Wave side until I had no choice," he answered. "Well, it wasn't intended, it worked out when Gato finally took over all of the ports and shipping companies." Haji spoke up. "Tazuna-san asked the village elders here on the shore of Fire for permission to use their village as the connection to Wave. They agreed. Between the Third Shinobi War and Yuzushio getting destroyed, it's been slowly dying." He didn't sound grim so much as resigned. "There hasn't been enough trade to sustain it, so people keep leaving. You might be able to live off of fish alone, but if you can't sell anything you can't exactly pay taxes or replace things that wear out if you can't make them yourself. Since construction started, it's kept more people employed from there since before I can remember. If the bridge works out, it won't just help Wave, but them too. Couldn't they just do different things besides just fish?" Sakura asked. "Wouldn't that work?" He shook his head. "It isn't that easy. A village grows into having all of those different things because there's demand in the first place. You can't just take a man and tell him he's a full-time carpenter now when there's nothing to build." "Oh," she went, looking very thoughtful. "I guess that makes sense. As shinobi, we're tools," Kakashi told her. "We might be able to be the solution to some problems, but we can't fix everything in this world. It would be like trying to use a kunai to build a house." He was right that you couldn't throw a ninja at every problem and expect it to be solved. Military force rarely made anything better, after all, but a kunai wouldn't be the absolute worst option, would it? I barely resisted the urge to say something. Unexpectedly, Kakashi met my eyes. "I'm sure you're trying to figure out how to prove my analogy wrong, but please don't," he said, with what I could only call badly faked amusement. His eye closed, wrinkled into a forced smile. "The last time you did it sent us in a circular argument. I got a headache from that one," Sakura grumbled. I didn't know Naruto could argue for that long, and he didn't even know what he was arguing about. I simmered in this unexpected call-out from my subconscious instead of responding to either of them. For some time, impossible to tell without being able to track the sun or a watch, the only sounds were the motor running and the occasional choppy wave slapping against the boat's hull. It was interrupted by the boat suddenly rocking side to side, a loud plunk, and then splashing. "Ah." While we were distracted, Naruto had somehow gone over the side. Sakura gasped. "Naruto." Kakashi sighed and, casually hooking his legs under the bench he was seated on, leaned over the side and fished Naruto out one-handed. He dropped the now soaked blonde into the middle of the boat. Naruto sputtered and gagged, doing his best to get the seawater out of his mouth before he blew his nose. "I hate the ocean." As if to punctuate this statement, when he unzipped his now sodden jacket, some slimy-looking kelp and a small silvery fish dropped to the deck. He stared at it in shock before he made a horrified sound of disgust. Aji looked at Naruto and then gave Kakashi an unsure look. "Are you sure he's in Uzumaki?" Trying to combine his understanding of what the Uzumaki had a reputation for and where they used to live with the blonde boy who was trying to help the fish out of the boat without touching it in any way was probably a difficult mental exercise. It looked like that vague micro-expression I had categorized as "I wish for death" was going to become a regular part of Kakashi's repertoire because he was wearing it again. Fairly sure, yes. It occurred to me that Minato's name was also ocean-themed. Naruto really wasn't living up to either legacy there, where the ocean was concerned, it seemed. Then again, it wasn't like he had any experience with it until just now. Rivers were entirely different. Sakura's patience for Naruto's fishy hang-up looked ready to end. "Naruto. Stop torturing the poor fish." There it was. She shoved him away before picking up the desperately flopping fish and dropping it into the water. It quickly disappeared out of view. Naruto looked at her in horror. Sakura, you have fish hands now. It's just a fish. Grow up already. But the fish. And the water. I had absolutely no idea what Naruto was trying to get across. I rubbed the back of my head. Fish do have some pretty nasty germs that you wouldn't want to get in any cuts. What? Nuo? Sensei. Sakura's earlier confidence immediately melted away. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Kakashi probably wanted to throw me off the boat now. On the plus side, I didn't hate myself so much that getting thrown into a dream ocean should be that bad. At least I didn't think I did. Regardless, we probably weren't making anything approaching a good impression on the sailor between Naruto's random and hopefully short-lived brush with thalassophobia and Sakura's sudden squeamishness over gross fish germs. Admittedly, the last one was entirely my fault, but still. Kakashi's visible eye closed for a long pained-looking moment before he finally opened it. Sakura, if you're concerned about fish germs, run your hands through the water over the side without falling in. Naruto, there is nothing in the water that you should be afraid of. Sasuke, please stop talking. Considering how little I actually said, that was unfair, but I was actually surprised he tried. We must really have had him near the breaking point. I didn't even know Kakashi was capable of being competent with pre-teens, but apparently he could be if he was desperate enough. Sakura made a face at him, but ultimately obeyed. Naruto, on the other hand, only gave Kakashi a suspicious look. How do you know? There could be sea monsters or something. The closest thing to a sea monster was sealed in his stomach right now, and I was pretty sure the Kyuubi had no interest in large bodies of water. At least, as far as thought exercises went, I would assume so. There is absolutely nothing out here, Kakashi said, in a long-suffering tone. Eventually the conversation lapsed into a peaceful quiet, the only sound coming from the motor, until Naruto spoke up again. Should I be feeling itchy? There was a nervous edge to Naruto's question, straining his attempt at sounding light. I turned to look at him. Even in the relatively low light from the all of the mist, there was an almost shimmery glint to Naruto. His unexpected trip into the ocean meant that as he slowly dried off, the salt was remaining stuck to his skin and his clothes. Combined with the mist, it meant he was slowly becoming not just itchy, but sticky as well. That was probably the worst combination. Before I could say anything, Kakashi shot a warning glance at me. Naruto, go sit in the front, he said, waving his fingers forward. Why? Just do it. I exchanged a look with Sakura and shifted to move back. She gave me a confused look, but stayed where she was. Naruto moved to the front of the boat and then turned around. Okay, now what GGGGK? Before he could finish what he had to say, Kakashi had swamped him with a slow-moving geyser of presumably fresh water, ignoring the shouts of surprise from the other adults. As far as I could tell, he was managing to make sure as little of the water as possible would end up in the boat, too. What an abuse of a jutsu. Is that better? Kakashi sounded happier at least. Naruto made a face at him, dripping onto the deck. How's soaking me with more water gonna help? Ninja Kaji said quietly, shaking his head. You were feeling like that because of all the salt that was covering you, I answered, ignoring Kakashi. Even with all this fog you were still drying off. Naruto blinked. Salt. And then, as if on automatic, he raised his arm up and licked his wrist before he processed what he just did and what he had been thinking the whole time about the ocean. He immediately gagged and tried to desperately scrub at his tongue before he realized he was just exacerbating it all. I guess this was just inevitable from Naruto trying to think more. This was apparently more than enough for Sakura to decide to no longer deal with any of us since she turned her attention to the civilians. Kaji-san, how long is it until we reach Wave? She politely asked. We're almost there, the man answered. Really? Sakura sounded surprised. How can you tell? I was impressed. The fog had only thickened as we got further away from shore. He showed her a compass before putting it away and placing his free hand on the fuel tank. By going at a constant speed the way we are and making sure we're staying on a straight course, it's easy. I know how much fuel the engine uses in these conditions, so I just have to keep an eye on the gauge if I want to keep track of time. I guess that was one way to do it. We're almost close enough that I'll have to turn the motor off. This comment attracted Naruto's attention. Why's that? Between the sound from the motor and the wakes we're leaving, it would make it easy for Gato's men to find us if they're out here, Kaji answered, seriously. We need to be quiet. Naruto cautiously moved to the back of the boat to look at the trail we were leaving behind us. Huh, he went. Those really are big, if you can find them. Do they last a long time? Long enough to follow if you see them. I'm taking you all across as a favor. I have no interest in becoming another missing sailor after a friendly visit from his thugs, Kaji said bluntly. There's enough of those these days. If that was the incentive to stay low, it said a lot that he was willing to take Tazuna and us across. Naruto's eyes widened before his expression turned serious and he balled his fists up. We're not going to let that happen. Good luck there. Kaji said it without any rancor to his voice, but it was clear he didn't believe Naruto at all. Kakashi reached over and gripped Naruto's head, pulling the boy back towards the bow. "Try not to make so many impossible promises, he murmured. It was quiet enough that I could barely hear it from where I was sitting, and Sakura looked like she had picked it up as well. Neither civilian, when had I started thinking of them like that, showed any sign they had heard it. Aji finally cut the engine and switched to his oar. The new silence in the fog was eerie. I refused to think about it. While things were staying relatively true to the series, I had absolutely no interest in seeing if thinking too hard would end up with a surprise shift from weird anime dreams to horror. Naruto had learned his lesson about not leaning too far over by now and instead was keeping his center of balance firmly inside the boat even as he tried to peer ahead. The only thing he would find staring like that was going to be eye strain. The fog was just too thick to make anything out until it was too close. If anything, it was thicker than when we had left Fire's shore, in spite of the fact we were supposed to be nearing land. It seemed to have put Kakashi on alert. "Get your bags ready," he told us, quietly but firmly. It wasn't a suggestion, but an order. Naruto turned around and looked as though for a moment he was going to protest, but after looking at everyone and seeing that Sakura and I were doing what Kakashi said, visibly swallowed and pulled his bag straps back onto his shoulders. Sakura saw it first. Whoa. The bridge had very suddenly come into sight, or to be more accurate, its concrete piles. We weren't that far from it at all, probably 20, maybe 30 feet. The bridge itself loomed high enough that its supports faded into the fog, its actual structure barely visible as a vague form above in the white-gray fog. "I had no idea bridges could get that big," Naruto said, his voice filled with amazement. "I did, but it was strange to come to the realization that such a normal bridge to me absolutely wouldn't be to any of them." Even Kakashi was quietly looking up at it, and it probably wasn't due to his bridge-related trauma. "At least, I hope not. This will be my best achievement in life if I can complete it," Tazuna said. "My daughter and grandson will be able to have better futures because of it. If I don't and Gato kills me, they'll mourn me, forever hating Konoha, and my grandson will probably not live to see adulthood." I guess he couldn't resist getting that jab of guilt-inducing pressure to remind us of our job. "I'm sure they'll be fine," Kakashi said, though he didn't sound like he was trying to be particularly reassuring. Sakura made a face, but only after she made sure Tazuna couldn't see. It struck me that being a ninja with how it was in the series was mostly customer service. Just with added weapons. "We're almost there," Kaji promised, after some time. "We'll be going further inland, where it isn't as open, just in case Gato's men are out here." Land slowly came into view, hazy in the fog. Naruto leaned forward suddenly, far enough that all three of us tried to grab for him, just to not have a repeat of his earlier splash. Kakashi bashed into me, and we ended up glaring at each other insomuch that he could glare with one eye as Sakura hauled Naruto so far back by the straps of his backpack that he rolled back onto it, leaving him flailing for a moment before he sat upright again. "Naruto." I was impressed at how Sakura had managed to compress shouted frustration into a conversational volume. She was taking the warning about being quiet seriously. "Are you trying to go over the side again?" He rubbed the back of his neck self-consciously. No, not really. Sorry. Thanks for the save, Sakura." Naruto beamed at her. "You." Sakura rolled her eyes at him and huffed, but eventually smiled back. "Think next time, okay?" This was compounded by her looking at me and Kakashi still eyeing the other and then muttering something indistinct under her breath that sounded rather like boys. That was interesting. Land edged into view and soon, to accompany it, the fainter shape and color of trees took form in the fog, the line between land and sea broken by a series of smaller arched bridges that ran along the shore. "Yay," said Naruto, quietly. I snorted. Apparently he could make it clear he was happy about things without being at a dull roar. He twisted back at me to make a face. "Hey. Don't laugh." I shrugged. "Keep it down," Kakashi reminded us. At some point he had pulled his book out, in spite of being in front of clients. Naruto eyed Kakashi, stuck his tongue out at me, and turned back to watch as we approached. Aji oared the boat towards the bridges. "We've been lucky so far, but we'll take the route with vegetation just in case." "Are there really other routes?" Sakura wondered. "This side of wave is covered with mangroves," Tazuna said, "but they aren't everywhere. It's easy to get lost in them if you aren't good with direction or familiar with the area. Gato's tried to clear some of them out, but he's found out the hard way why you shouldn't do that." "Why's that?" "Mangroves prevent erosion," Kakashi boredly answered. I wondered if I should point out that he hadn't been flipping pages. I imagine if he's built anything in cleared out areas he's found the foundation washing out from under him. He's wasted plenty of money and resources on buildings that aren't going to last another year. Tazuna sounded affronted, but then again, he did build things. I didn't know anyone from the engineering college who would be that happy either at their work washing away so quickly. "Ma, he really is rich, isn't he? If he's so rich, why is he still making so much money?" How are people not just taking it from him? Naruto asked. That's called taxation, I said at the same time as Kakashi. We stared at each other. Sakura ignored the two of us. Remember? If he's doing all this criminal stuff like Tazuna-san says, he's probably making a lot of money illegally, too. I absolutely did not remember that. I could only assume that it had to do with Tazuna owning up and that it probably went the same way as the story. Hopefully. So much about these dreams was just stupid. Especially the part where I didn't even seem to get to have original jokes without them being given to Kakashi. Oh, yeah, Naruto said, obviously lying. Sakura rolled her eyes. We approached a bridge and entered one of the tunnels. As we emerged from the other side, Naruto spoke up. Wow. I could see why. The village on the other side stretched out ahead, split up by clusters of mangrove trees. Every building in sight was built on the water, their connected deck several feet above the surface. I wondered if it would be the poverty or weather that contributed to their worn looks more. Some of the buildings looked rougher than others. We went past the initial groups of buildings and past the mangroves until we reached more buildings that bordered actual land, somewhat secluded from the rest. Probably to Naruto's relief, we stopped at an actual dock. This is where I leave you. Good luck, Kaji said. He glanced at Naruto, who had immediately flung himself onto the wooden dock and was doing a small dance of happiness to himself at not being on a boat anymore, before looking at Kakashi. And maybe teach the kid how to sail. If you can. It's sad to lose your heritage. Well, he wasn't wrong. Kakashi, who was just about to step up, slumped over. Sakura shoved at him to get off the boat. The Jounin rolled with it, as though the momentum from Sakura wouldn't have thrown anyone else off. Thank you, Tazuna told the sailor, once he was on the pier. It was probably the most sincere he had been the whole time. Kaji gave a short wave, restarted the engine, and motored off. Now. Get me home safely. I guess things really were about to kick off, weren't they? Kakashi made board agreements to placate him as Sakura, and I watched Naruto speed off ahead of us to finally be on real ground again. Ugh. Naruto. Slow down. Sakura called. You don't have to take point all the time. But it's fun. Naruto turned around and shouted back. You're not a very good point if you're looking at us. She yelled at him. Judging from his expression, he had forgotten that. He immediately turned around, so fast it was accidentally a spin. He at least was facing the right direction when he stopped. Naruto was taking it seriously, but not overly so. At least, I thought so. I don't think he was seeing this as some weird competition to prove his worth at any rate, though eventually we closed a distance between us and him. Sakura, if anything, seemed to be more nervous. What's wrong? I asked. She immediately blushed. I regretted asking. Oh. She said, only turning more pink. I was just thinking. Sakura drifted off, looking the other direction. It's nothing important. I sighed. Drop the false modesty. You shouldn't pretend it isn't. It was annoying enough to see in freshman girls who were still trying to cultivate some kind of persona before they realized it had an impact on their GPA. I didn't want to suffer through more of it while asleep. What are you thinking? Sakura blinked in surprise. Oh. She obviously hadn't expected to actually have to put her thoughts into words. It's just everything about this mission. If Gato's hiring ninja too, it means this is going to be more dangerous, isn't it? But at the same time, since Tazuna-san says this bridge wouldn't be just good for Wave, but water and fire too, and probably other countries, why would they work for him? Wouldn't that go against their interests, too? I felt a hand grip into my hair and head and saw its match anchor onto Sakura's head. Not all ninja are loyal to hidden villages or their countries of origin, Kakashi said, his voice coming from behind and above us. Some are actually very short-sighted and only care about money. I approve of you trying to think over this, by the way. It's important to understand the underlying situation for more complicated missions. Sakura tried to elbow him in the gut, but he let go and stepped back out of reach before she could even wing his flak jacket. She huffed, unhappy. Well, wouldn't it be good for them, too, if it'd make things cheaper? Not everyone sees prosperity as a goal, Kakashi answered, angling to be in step next to Sakura. For Konoha, we see it as a reward and as something that helps the village as a whole, much like fire does. Other hidden villages aren't so lucky. I wasn't sure whether to ignore him for being so nosy and clearly trying to fish for getting us to ask what he meant or just to indulge him and ask, which would only reward this behavior. Either way, it was weird to think of Kakashi as the sort of person who used providing random relevant information as a social interaction. Most desperate gifted kids outgrew it. Sakura had no such compunctions. At least not anymore. Get to the point, sensei, she demanded. No patience? He asked. No, she said, glaring up at him. He feigned a put upon sigh. Some villages rely on things like fear and desperation to keep their ninja in line. Those are the currencies of despotism. There was no way he came up with a phrase that sounded that good on his own. I squinted at him. Did you get that from your book? Kakashi ignored me, the only sign he had heard me at all was that his Icha novel suddenly disappeared from view. Villages like that only foment had he forgotten he was talking to children. Probably. Rebellion and tend to produce missing nin in larger numbers. Like Kiri. The demon brothers are a product of that kind of system. They're revolutionaries. Missing nin like that tend to work in clusters. Ideologues tend to put everyone else on edge. Sakura went. Her brows furrowed together. She was clearly putting a lot of thought into what he had said. I wondered how much of it she actually understood. Naruto had wandered further ahead again, presumably from not wanting to waste any of his brain power on this conversation. I couldn't blame him, it probably would have been a slog for him to try. Even Sakura was visibly trying to put it together in a way she could understand, and she was an intelligent actual 12 no, 13, something in the back of my head corrected me year-old. In front of us, Naruto's body language shifted into something more alert, how much of it was actually conscious I didn't know, but from one moment he had gone from half playfully ambling with his hands shoved into his pockets, to staring into the vegetation off the side of the road, to suddenly pulling a shuriken out and throwing it. "Naruto!" Sakura shouted when she realized what he had done. "What gives?" The older man looked stressed. "You're supposed to protect me. Not give me a heart attack." There was something there. He insisted. Kakashi was already walking into the brush, not bothering with any of them. Not wanting to bother listening to the stress-induced sniping, I followed him. This part had stayed the same. A white-furred rabbit had collapsed beneath the shuriken Naruto had thrown, shaking from fear. Sakura and Naruto must have trailed after us because I heard a noise of surprise from Sakura, shortly followed by Naruto scooping the rabbit up to inspect it. Both of them looked horrified at the rabbit's near-death experience. It had always struck me weird in retrospect that in the series that they had been so affected by Naruto almost killing a rabbit, considering they were supposed to be ninja, but it was very different looking at a small, innocent and very cute-looking fluffy creature that was terrified out of its mind. Kakashi was still looking out past the road while the rabbit kept their attention absorbed on it. His countenance changed more suddenly than Naruto's had minutes before, eye focused and everything about his body language suddenly on sharp alert. "Get down," he demanded. We barely had time to process it. I tackled Tazuna over, trying and failing to remember how this had gone in the show, while Naruto and Sakura dropped flat on the road only a few feet away. From the angle I was at, I couldn't see Kakashi. Something passed above our heads, whirling. I stood up once I no longer heard it. The other two were still on the ground. Kakashi was already standing when I looked towards him, looking up at one of the trees. Zabuza Mamachi was already standing on top of the hilt of his sword, the blade embedded in the tree, looking back and down at us, the dramatic fuck. As cool as it looked, I found myself realizing that his entrance was extremely impractical on multiple levels. Then again, he wasn't the one toting children and a civilian around, so maybe he felt like he could afford to show off. Kakashi's expression hadn't lost the complete alertness he had displayed just moments ago, but he was a quarter of the way into his normal slouch, thumbs looped into his pockets. Were they both trying to show off? Was that what Jounin did? The hidden mists missing Nin Mamachi's Zabuza. He swung an arm out and back towards us, warningly. "Get back, all of you." I looked over at Naruto and Sakura instead. The two of them had their attention entirely on Zabuza, which was fair. Sakura was frowning to herself, and Naruto actually looked focused. Zabuza's entrance had been more dramatic like this than it was in illustrated or animated form, even if it was over the top to the point of being unrealistic. There really was a serious commitment to posing going on here for someone who was supposed to be an assassin. I wondered what it said about me that my dreams weren't even trying to bother to correct that part. On the one hand, things were still mostly unfolding according to how the story had played out. On the other, changes were gradually accruing with each dream, to the point where each interaction was beginning to impact others. Naruto wasn't so quick to act on his impulses and was more actually sure of himself when he did. The differences in Naruto barely held a candle to Sakura, though. The mostly blind trust she had held in Kakashi and willingness to let her teammates be in charge apparently had never taken root in this dream version because of the bell test going so off track. She was much more willing to question things and ask to make her own decisions instead of assuming that Kakashi actually knew best. At least I assumed that was the case and not some kind of subconscious favoritism on my part. It made me curious about how it would continue to play out if I kept having these dreams. Sharingan. What the hell is the Sharingan? Naruto's voice interrupted my thoughts. At some point when I wasn't paying attention, Kakashi had pushed his hit I8 up. Did I really zone out of a whole dream conversation? Again. Apparently so. I didn't particularly feel like volunteering to explain. Not only did I not want to even in the privacy of a dream, it felt embarrassing to admit to myself I hadn't forgotten what the Sharingan was. Ever since the first time I had gotten my hands on the manga, I wasn't even that sure I was up to giving an explanation that wouldn't be too in-depth. Fortunately, it seems Zabuza was more than willing to show off his knowledge. Heh. Your brats don't know. His head tilted, mockingly. I suppose it doesn't matter much when the Uchiha clan is all but extinct. I tried to ignore the fact that both Sakura and Naruto had swung their heads quickly to stare at me. A part of me couldn't resist letting the thought bubble up that it would actually make this harder if Zabuza thought there was a second Sharingan user involved. I did my best to squash it down. It's one of the 3 great Taijutsu, Zabuza continued on, as though he hadn't noticed. He had turned to look down at Kakashi, still standing on the hilt of his sword. I seriously doubted that it had somehow passed him by when he actually had a full view of all of us. Immensely powerful, and it's supposed to be able to read and defeat all jutsu. Of course the scariest ability is the one he's known for best, isn't it, Copynin? The handbook I kept when I was part of Kiri's assassination squad had plenty of information on you. You were known for having copied over 1,000 jutsu before I went rogue. How many must it be now? More than enough to deal with you, I think, Kakashi answered. There was an almost deceptive sort of casualness to his tone of voice, in direct contrast to how he was standing. I think that's plenty of talk. Zabuza crouched. Wait. Sakura shouted. If you're a missing nin from Kiri, why are you working for Gato? Naruto and I turned to stare at her. Sakura, I dunno if right now's the time to be asking questions like that, he said, nervously. Zabuza snorted. What the fuck sort of question is that? His attention turned towards Kakashi for a moment, one thin eyebrow visibly raised at the other Jounin even from this distance, before refocusing his attention on Sakura. I don't work under a village. I still need to eat and make money, too, little girl. Can't kill the Mizukage on an empty stomach or with an equally empty purse. That's not what I mean. I was beginning to think that Sakura had lost it. You work with the Demon Brothers too, don't you? And if you're all revolutionaries, why are you working for someone that's just going to make it harder for you? What? Naruto's eyes met mine. He looked completely confused. Sakura-chan, Kakashi spoke up. There was a hint of strained lightness to his voice. We aren't supposed to be encouraging revolution against foreign governments, not like this, anyways. Please do me a favor and forget that, Tazuna-san. Behind me, I could hear the old man swallow. Zabuza stood back up. What makes you think this would make things harder for me? If this bridge of his gets built, it will end up sending more trade to and from water. Yes, but Sakura hesitated for a moment, clearly trying to decide how to phrase what she wanted to say. Kakashi-sensei said that in places like Kiri, they don't really care about regular money. That it's fear and desperation they use as their currency that keeps their ninja under control. Wouldn't a bridge make it harder for that to work? She was looking increasingly more confident as she spoke, standing a little taller than she had when she first tried to stop the fight. The man who took us across said the bridge wouldn't just help Wave, but also the coastal village and fire we left from. If Tazuna-san's bridge is going to improve that many people's lives, wouldn't it have an impact in Kiri, too? If it's so bad there, but they know it's better elsewhere and it's easier to leave, wouldn't they? A hidden village needs people for it to be a hidden village. Judging from the way his shoulders were slouching more and more, Kakashi hadn't expected to be dragged into this that way. No one spoke for some time, long enough that soon it wasn't only the breeze in the trees we heard, but the slow sound of birds resuming their activities, too. It was a bit specious. Zabuza and his sword disappeared from the tree, and just as suddenly, we heard what could only be laughter before he dropped into a landing, right in front of Kakashi. I was vaguely aware of kunai suddenly being gripped between both my hands again, and Sakura and Naruto armed up as well, the 3 of us backing up to create a closer perimeter to Tazuna. It was only a half second later when Zabuza hadn't attacked that I realized that Kakashi hadn't bothered to move at all. He read that shit. And bring it up to children. He was still laughing. Apparently he had recognized Sakura's butchering of Kakashi's reference for what it was. This rich inner life was starting to get seriously bullshit. You know, you just admitted to reading them too, Kakashi answered. Fuck. Zabuza stopped laughing. Naruto edged up to my side. PSST. Hey. Sasuke, he started. It was actually in a whisper range. Do you know what just happened? Because I don't. I seriously hoped he was talking about Sakura's intervention working. I'm not really sure, but it just kept us out of a serious fight, I said back, quietly. Let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. Huh? What's that supposed to mean? Sakura looked at the 2 of us, her eyebrows crinkled together in a mix of confusion and concern, before she rolled her eyes. She ended up stomping off towards Kakashi and Zabuza, leaving the 2 of us to our own devices. Presumably to still guard Tazuna. Don't question it too hard, I explained, feeling just as confused as Naruto looked now. Ahead, the 2 Jounin were having, as far as I could tell, a surprisingly serious and civil conversation, considering that minutes ago they were more than ready to go at each other with the intent to kill to ensure their respective missions were accomplished. They had also stepped away to not be as easily overheard. At some point Kakashi had pushed his hit I-8 back down over his Sharingan. I watched as Sakura approached them. The moment she was near, their attention turned towards her and Kakashi patted her on the head again, tousling her hair. She actually tried to punch him this time. Zabuza's laugh was loud enough for us to hear from where we were when Kakashi casually sidestepped it. He reached over her head, grabbed the top handle of her gear bag, lifted it in her and turned her around before giving her a light push to send her back. Sakura stomped back towards us, visibly angry with both fists still clenched. "What happened?" I asked. "I can't believe him." She started to vent. Sakura was looking visibly angrier with each passing second. Next to me, Naruto took a step backwards and then another. He said, "I don't need to know." And then. Sakura cut herself off, huffed, closed her eyes, and then breathed out. Eventually she opened them back up, smiling once again, like she hadn't come close to having a full rage meltdown. She turned towards Tazuna. "Tazuna-san, are you alright?" Tazuna eyed her warily. Yes, thank you for asking." A loud bird call cut through the air. I couldn't tell where it came from or if it was even supposed to come from somewhere. Naruto twisted around, trying to figure out its origin. "Ah." Naruto's eyes widened, looking behind Tazuna. I turned to see what he was looking at. Even with my angle of view blocked when Tazuna turned as well, I could already tell who it was supposed to be from my brief glance of dark hair, a bun holder, and a green Haori. He was down on one knee, head partially lowered. "You called for me, Zabuza-sama?" A soft voice inquired. "There's a change of plans. We're breaking our contract with Gato. Instead, we're working with Leaf Nin for the time being." "Hello, my name is Haku." Haku stood up and approached us. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Naruto didn't just look elated, but had the same mushy expression he sometimes still directed towards Sakura when she wasn't paying attention. Again, it grated on me that comparison came unbidden. Any decision I could make on whether or not to tell Naruto Haku was actually a boy dropped in priority as I felt my head pulse and everything faded away.